The events of this story begin in the training arena of the palace of the Frederick Empire. The knights were practicing, and one of them noticed that the training today was harder than he thought it would be. He further inquired if the newcomer was all right. The one was choking very hard, and it was obvious from him that he was tired, but stated that he was fine. The interlocutor remarked that Commander Pasteros was a bit tough, but he was also talented, so they should build up their strength and keep going. The newcomer remarked that he agreed with that. Still, it seems that the commander doesn't really fit the words a bit tough. After all, it turns out that if a person doesn't have the strength to escape, he will face him and understand all the reasons for the rumors. And now the very newcomer was trying to crawl away, for he had no strength, and the man kept stepping on him. This madness was literally abstract at the time. So it comes out that one day, the Frederick Empire was blessed by a great dragon. After that, in each of the generations of the 4 powerful duchies and the Imperial family, a child with magical abilities was born. The children who possessed magic were called exalted. Their physical and mental abilities outshone the skills of ordinary people by several times. However, even they had weaknesses while doing so. As the frequency of using the magic awakening spell increased, so did the soul distortion. In the end, it turned out that all of them were simply going insane. As their minds were lost, their souls were also lost, and not a single person could help them. All they could do was wait for the next exalted to save them. Soon, the greatest exalted of this nation will arrive here. That person is the Emperor, whose name is Alexander Duncan Michello II, and brings the man in order to thwart Commander Pasteros. The newcomer at this very time, very much worried the century did not want to be killed. He tried to crawl away and save himself, but the captain kept approaching him. In the end, the guy thought that he would not be able to survive all this because he would wipe out his powder. At the moment when the man tried to touch the knight, there was a girl who turned to her brother. It was because of this that he stopped and immediately turned his attention to the girl. She came closer to her brother and gently touched his face with both hands. As she did so, she remarked that this was why she had told him not to push himself. In the exit, the country repeated it so many times after all. After a few moments, the man did come to his senses because of what his sister had addressed him. He touched his sister's hand with his own and apologized to Dahlia. The very same knight was very happy that he managed to save himself. Next, the girl scolded the lad that he had rested too long, but the one stated that he was really fine now. This girl's name is Dahlia Pasteros, and she is the younger sister of this cruel, sublime, but not of this world. Opening her eyes, the girl realized that she was in the otome game that was her mental past life. Right now, the emperor came to her at no dawn with flowers. He immediately apologized for being late and stated for the girl to accept the gift from the bottom of her heart. As a consequence, it turned out that of course On received the favor of the exalted one. The girl declared to the emperor to take the gift for himself. Further, he became very sad because he so wanted to appear spectacularly. The heroine, in turn, thought that not only is it not enough that everyone here does not fulfill their duties, so they also cling to her. And just as she sent the emperor away, another man approached her. He noticed that it was time for the mistress to choose. The girl inquired in surprise at what she should choose. That man turned out to be the current head of the powerful Artis family, a towering man named Melton Artis. But before that man could even answer anything, he was pushed away by another man. He inquired if the lady had an escort recruited better than him. It was the current head of Bluefort, whose name was Levin Bluefort. And, as everyone could guess, he is also a sublime. The main character immediately told them that she would definitely not go with any of them. The men were shocked, and Melton wondered if she would go with Sir Cedric again. Cedric is the second prince of the empire, and the exalted imperial family in the next line of government. The girl noticed that things are not at all what they think they are. Levin inquired, but who the Yule is given to this man? The girl smiled and remarked that she had promised Adelisa to go to the ball with her. The men, after hearing her words, were very shocked and asked what she was saying. Suddenly, they heard someone addressing her and immediately turned their heads there. It was a girl who immediately ran up to the heroine and hugged her. While doing so, she stated that Dahlia had promised her that she would go with her this time, and she didn't need anyone else. This girl is the protagonist of the game Labyrinths of Our Love, and her name is Adelicia Benitez. The protagonist was definitely convinced that the original story is disgusting, a novella where Adelicia was the only one who was getting nationwide love and obsession. But now there was only one difference from the original story, for a girl had taken her place. Now the heroine did not understand how it could even happen like this. It so happened that the protagonist remembered her past life 2 weeks after she was 13 years old. Then she was in her room and was a little shocked. It was then that a maid approached the girl and asked if the mistress would like a cup of tea. She stated that of course she would, and also the cookies that had recently been brought. She also asked that the giver eat with her. The maid was shocked and inquired as to what she had said. The woman further stated that the mistress was the only one who was concerned about her subordinates. During this very time, the heroine remembered the event of 2 weeks ago. At this very moment, she was very shocked at what was happening. After all, it turns out that she was now in the world of otome game, where she spent her free time. The girl thought that this was literally some kind of maze of the Ouroboros. Ouroboros is a snake that eats its own tail. One doesn't care about the number of beautiful characters, or otherwise the number of choices made, one still gets bogged down in the mud. When the girl in your life went through this game, you wondered why the hell all paths lead to a bad ending. It turns out that this tragic game of 19+, without any hope for a happy ending. From such memories, the girl immediately after the tea party lay down to calm down. But the maid declared that the mistress cannot lie down immediately after eating because it is harmful. The heroine did not care about this because she thought that she did not know how soon she would die. Also, she didn't know about why it would be. However, in all her 13 years, she had never met but her brother. Her brother's name is Hikan Pesteros, and out of all the characters, he is the creepiest. He literally doesn't care about bloodlines. If a person decides to interfere with him, they will not live. The maid tried to lift the brooding girl and remarked that if she eats a lot, she needs to walk a lot of them. The heroine, for her part, kept thinking that how good it was that this guy was one of a kind. It was completely incomprehensible to her why all of this was happening. She pondered if there was any logical explanation for her becoming his little sister that didn't exist at all. After all, Hikan was the only child of the Duchy of Pesteros. Well, now, it just so happens that the Pesteros family now has 2 children. To put it simply, the heroine is a character that should not have appeared at all in the game Labyrinth of Ouroboros. The maid had, after all, chattered the heroine to go outside for a walk. Now she was telling the girl that the weather outside was beautiful. Dahlia, in turn, continued to wonder why exactly his sister. It so happens that at the end of the game, Hikan goes mad and the Duchy of Pesteros is destroyed by the Emperor. These events remained the same in all the endings. It turns out that the girl says goodbye to them at her execution. The relief for the girl was that her brother is now only 16 years old, but already his mental health is deteriorating. After his 18th birthday, he will reach his magical awakening, so she will have a chance. The magical awakening is a detail of the Ouroboros maze game that brings cruelty and darkness to this whole story. The implication is that if a person uses magic very often, they will lose self-control, and there is no going back. As a consequence, the male characters self-destruct, wanting to monopolize the main character. Well, the main madman in this game as just and is Hikan Pesteros. It turns out that the girl would very much like to be reborn in a more peaceful world. The only thing that wasn't in the game was the appearance of Dahlia. At this point, the girl stated to the maid that they should take the flowers she had picked to her room. The woman, in turn, noticed that she really collected a lot. After a while, the heroine stood near the mirror and thought that they had not seen her brother, so she could not say for sure. But perhaps the end could be avoided if Hikan saw his charming sister. The girl wondered if he would even consider letting her live. Still, it comes out. The heroine standing there was really quite cute. Next, she began practicing a smile to her little brother, then thought that she would be the one to show him if it ever happened at all. After that, the girl settled down on the floor and decided that she didn't care anymore. After all, it turns out that she had been told that Hikan would be staying with relatives. She pondered, whatever he was doing there, how likely it was that they would remain strangers to each other. The heroine was sure that this was where things were headed. However, now she didn't understand at all why the hell something like that had happened. So it turns out that now in front of her stood the very brother, with whom she thought she would not see at all. It was only 5 minutes ago that the protagonist was sitting in her room eating. Then she, in turn, thought that by having a snack, she felt ready to solve any problems. But suddenly she heard Darylyn's voice speaking from outside the door. That's why she wondered what was going on in there and wondered who had come. Next, the girl ran to the door to see who was there. At that moment, she heard the maid saying to the young gentleman that he could not just like that enter the room. But this did not stop the boy at all, and he immediately opened the door and came face to face with the girl. Together, they looked into each other's eyes and thus evaluated each other. The girl immediately realized that this particular guy was Haikon Pasteros, and all this only meant that the time for their meeting had finally arrived. The heroine carefully looked at the guy and thought that it was very hard for her, so she was literally about to fall. She wondered if he was exactly 16 years old, for why he was so huge. His strength had already awakened, however, he is really huge. The maid continued to say that the mistress was still not ready for the meeting. At this moment, the guy turned to Dahlia. He then briefly told her that her father had died. The girl accepted this information with surprise and immediately thought about it. She did not understand at all why this was so. Maybe because of the memories of her past life, but she felt absolutely nothing after hearing the given information. She was now contemplating whether or not she should pretend to be upset. Initially, the girl's mom died very soon after her birth, and her father did not come to the residence due to his busyness. The heroine wondered if it was possible that Haikon had gone crazy because he wasn't receiving love from his family. It turns out that these were the kind of thoughts that frequented her in those moments when she was playing the past life game. Literally right now, they were standing and looking at each other. The girl realized that all her knowledge was gone literally in a second. At the same time, she realized that it seemed right now her brother was assessing her importance, where and how he would take advantage of the child that bore the name Pasteros. Still, as expected, her brother is a cold and emotionless man. Suddenly, he declared that the girl was not crying now. The girl looked at him and thought that they should do it together. It so happens that literally now she is watching the childhood of the most dangerous character. Before meeting him, much thought. It turns out that every time Haikon goes to his execution, and for some reason he faces death at the end. It's already turning out to translate to her death too. The heroine thought she just wanted to leave this house, but it's not that easy to do. It still turns out that she is only a little girl, and after the death of her father, the only thing she can do in this situation is not to get under the feet of her brother Haikon at all. Now the girl has decided that she has already chosen her role, and thought whether it's worth it now to pretend to be a little sister in front of her brother. It turns out that this was how her brother would decide that he had no need to worry about the child. Suddenly the guy declared that the girl was completely useless and immediately turned around. The heroine only agreed with this. At the same time, she thought that she will still wait from the time when she can leave this mansion. She also wondered what kind of person Haikon would call stupid and immature. At the very moment when the guy was about to leave the girl, she declared that here was something she had. The girl at that moment pulled out her croissant and held it out to her brother. He turned around to look at it and inquired what it was. The heroine remarked with a slightly embarrassed look that she wanted him to have his strength. She further inquired if the brother's was okay, as he must be upset about his own father's death. At this point, she remembered that there was a joke in one of the novels she had read in a past life. It turns out that a spy enters enemy troops with the purpose of killing his enemy, having gained, gave him a bite of bread. But in the end, it turns out that the spy never managed to kill him and simply left. Still, it turns out that the whole story tells about the human soul. The heroine herself knows perfectly well that the soul of a heckler has absolutely no soul, because for him, such concepts are just stupidity. After a moment, the brother smiled, and then swung that very croissant. The girl immediately wondered what he was going to do with it. He paused for a second with the croissant up in the air, and it was unclear what he was going to do. The girl wondered if he was going to throw it on the floor and step on it. If this was really the case, then her mission would be successful, complete. At the last moment, Haikon stopped and put the croissant down without doing anything with it. As a consequence, he noticed that his father's funeral would be held tomorrow, and then turned around. He left the pastry in his hand and walked leisurely to the exit of that room. The girl only saw him off with a glance at his back, wondering if the mission she wanted to do was accomplished or failed. At this very time, the maid immediately ran up to the girl and turned to her mistress. She noticed that the girl was very scared after that. Indeed, the village had a very frightened look, and she thought that her body was now shaking very violently. It turns out that, as expected, she should leave this place at the first opportunity. However, if she were to live on her own, she would have to work hard for money, for even if she sold all her dresses and jewelry, it would not be enough. Under such circumstances, she has other options for the development of events. Knowing the secrets of the main male characters, the events that will happen in the world, she will have to take advantage of it. But she will still continue to build up a saintly simplicity in front of her brother Haikon. It is in this way that she should not stay in the mansion until she has saved up enough money. Still, it turns out that this will definitely not be an easy occupation for her. The next day, as was told by her brother, was the funeral of the heroine's father. Both the heroine and her brother Haikon were there at the time of the ceremony. They did not speak to each other and only performed the rituals. Together, they piled the earth on their father's coffin and used shovels in doing so. Along with the heroine, there was also her nanny, who was worried about her mistress. The girl took her hand and stated to Darlin that she was really fine. Her nanny is the only person the girl can trust, but even she must not find out about her escape. After all, it turns out that she will definitely faint when she hears all of this. Right now, the girl thought that she should just forget about it all. Suddenly, the girl heard the conversations of the people who were at the ceremony. Some people were telling the boy that he was only 16 years old, and he would already have to lead the duchy. Someone stated that Julio would be the next duke. But the interlocutor remarked that this was not true, for how could his title be so high? The heroine knew that the ancestor of Julio has to be a cousin and the duke. It turns out that recently in the center of the vault, he showed his brilliant abilities. But the people who are here have no idea what kind of person is among them. However, as they did and said because of the sudden death of the duke, this place is really empty. It turns out that it was originally supposed to be occupied by Haikon, but he is still too young after all. It turns out that it's true that the successor is chosen from among the nobles, and they use power wherever they can. They don't really know as much about Haikon as she does, but it turns out that he's achieved the position of duke by his own efforts. The heroine looked at the guy and wondered if he looked sad or if he was just pretending. After all, it turns out that by the expression on his face, you can never know what is on his mind. Then she realized that she had to take his hand right now, and all this is because her role is that of an innocent little sister. That is why the girl took his hand and felt that it was quite cold. The girl then turned to her brother and sweetly inquired if he was all right now. The guy took a few seconds and didn't answer, and then he did say something to her. He, even in spite of her, declared that she should not grab his hand just out of her whim. The girl, for her part, realized that she knew he would say that. Still, she wondered if he really hadn't pushed back into her. Perhaps he was just tired of fighting it all. Suddenly, someone caught their attention and addressed the young master and young mistress. As he did so, this person stated that he had something important to inform them. The boy immediately smiled and turned around to the side. At that, he snatched his hand away from the girl and stepped away from her. He then inquired of his interlocutor as to what he wanted to tell him. The man remarked that if he was talking about it, they wanted to note since he was under 18, he would need an assistant. That was why they had discussed something and wanted to tell him. Suddenly, Haikon interrupted him and remarked with expense in his voice who gave him the right to pry into the affairs of their house. He also wondered if the man was a member of the Pasteros family. The protagonist realized that Haikon is an exalted one after all, and that is why it turns out that even if he is 16 years old, he can be the heir because of his great power. Even if the only heir is a 16-year-old guy, it's the opposite if he's an exalted one. Someone who is better than the average person doesn't need a representative or helper. However, some do keep in touch for the sake of maintaining a good relationship with their chosen family. But here, Haikon has absolutely no interest in such a thing. The interlocutor there stated to the young gentleman that, after all, the lady is still too young. The heroine, in turn, thought that he carries, because what is such a nonsense? The man continued to say that perhaps Haikon does not need protection, but he should think about the young lady. After all, someone just has to guard her. At this very moment, the guy immediately looked at the girl with his cold gaze. The heroine was very frightened by this. She thought that this is a completely bad sign. It turns out that her Bharat can simply give up on her if he gets tired of her. So it turns out that if she spoils his plans, he will want to get rid of her soon. That's why the girl immediately ran up to her brother and grabbed his clothes. The girl hid behind her brother and pitifully said that she didn't need anyone but her brother. The man immediately wanted to claim something about Mistress something, but she stated that her brother was her main defense. At the same time, she thought that she was just playing with death. She also told her interlocutors that she didn't even know them or their names. It turns out that they can be so mean. It turns out that today they buried their own father, and I wonder if they do not realize that the place and time is not appropriate. The girl continued to say it seriously, and her brother looked at her.
After a while, all those very interlocutors left them. At the same time, they said that it seemed that everything had gone to waste. After that, the girl exhaled with ease and thought that she had won today.
Although she realized that they would still come back, she had another problem in hers right now. She looked at her brother and wondered if she had done well in her mission. Her brother looked her in the eye, and further. The girl, for her part, thought he was going to like all of this. The brother looked at the graves of his own parents and turned to Dahlia. At the same time stated that indeed it was so, since they were left only the two of them. Immediately after these words, he left the place in an unknown direction. The girl stayed together with her nanny and thought whether he meant that he would do all the good to stay alone. A whole month had passed since her father's funeral. Distant relatives often come to solve this problem then and demonstrate their desire to capitalize on the situation. Breaking into the girl's room, they begin to realize that they will not be able to get through to Haikon. But in the end, the girl is in the same position as they are, because if she holds on to him, nothing good will come to her. All this is because she has to repeat the same words that she only needs her own brother. Because of this, a rumor spread in high society that the younger Lady Pesteros could not be without her brother. The girl thought that really hurtful turnout, but she would hope it would help to lower her brother's guard. At least the relatives don't come around anymore because of her impetuous rejection. It also seemed to the girl that there was no problem with that, for she had done a good job. Right now, the girl was sitting at the table and of one woman and drinking tea. She inquired of Dahlia what had happened while she was away. The woman was a guest from the 4th influential duchy and was a towering member of the Blueport family. In her infancy, the protagonist lay in her crib and cried loudly. There were maids walking near her and saying that she was crying again. One of them asked what they should do because it was unclear where the master was. Then the girl's mother also died, and so the maids said that they certainly understood that he was grieving for his own wife at neglecting his daughter quite badly. That's when this exalted woman came and approached the girl. She literally immediately bore the girl in her arms, and she stopped crying afterward. At this, she inquired if her name was Dahlia, for she was really cute. And after that, the strange woman introduced herself. Now they were sitting together with the heroine at a tea party. Sublime inquired whether she should not be sad because of the death of her own father. The girl declared that, to be honest, she felt nothing at the moment. The interlocutor smiled and remarked that maybe she did, because that's not a bad thing. She further inquired if the girl wanted a brownie. The heroine remarked with a smile that, of course, she wanted it very much. That said, the protagonist could never have imagined that this woman could be over 40 years old. She wondered if it was possible just because she was sublime. It turns out that she is the mistress of the powerful Duchy of Blueport, and her ability is to create a huge magic circle that suppresses everything around her. But before her ability manifested, her husband was burned in a fire, and she almost became the next victim of the fire. And it is to hide all these burns that he applies a mask and gloves. Afraid of people touching her, she stopped attending public events, and only once the girl was able to support her by the hand. The woman stated to her that she was still just a baby when she thought how long her body would remain so tiny. Still, she was glad that she hadn't changed at all. The girl immediately asked that she didn't tease her now. Also, the girl noticed that she drinks milk every day, and the interlocutor smiled and stated that it was really nice. The heroine knew that she was really a nice person, because she had never noticed any anger behind her. It turns out that this woman takes care of her to this day. Also, that same duchess has a son, whose name is Laven Blueport, and it must be hard for her to take care of a girl as well. Laven is now staying at the Duchess of Blueport's mansion, and once he said that he was not going to the capital in 4 years.
The interlocutor asked the girl how she felt when she first met her brother for the first time in all those 13 years. The girl made a confused look and thought for a while.
She then made horns and remarked that he was indeed very scary. The woman stated that indeed ordinary people were afraid of the Sublime, for there had been a couple of some scary incidents. It turns out that the Sublime losing their minds becomes dangerous, and of course people started avoiding them after that. Thanks to the Emperor's intervention, this problem was almost solved. However, almost 30 years ago, one of the worst incidents happened. Doc Artus wiped out all the royal mages. That was why a law was passed regarding some obligations of the Exalted. For example, one of these was that they were obliged to report regularly on their mental health. The girl immediately thought that for great power and the fee is really high. It turns out that the past years have passed without any incidents, however. According to the plot of the game Urberus Maze, soon one of the Exalted will go insane again. Although there is no exact information about it, one can never know exactly where and in what time period it will happen. The protagonist realized that all she knew was that the Exalted man had lost his mind right at the ball. Since then, it was impossible to track the time of the Sublime's loss of sanity, so even the Imperial power was powerless here. The girl looked at her interlocutor and thought about having her ladyship look after her son. It turns out that because the girl is the only one who knows the end of the story, she is the one who is very lonely. The heroine noticed the interlocutor that although she is also sublime, but not at all scary. Well, but her brother looks as if he wants to sell her to someone. Suddenly the girl asked with horror, what if he forces her to marry some fat uncle? Or worse, force her future husband to stay in the Pesteros house, and will do it on this only so that a new Sublime will be born. Which is why the heroine has a plan. Grown up, she will run away and gain independence in doing so. The woman who was drinking tea immediately poured it out from the unexpected news. With great surprise, she inquired whether the girl had picked up such a thing and whether it was from the maids. The heroine remarked that it was not so at all. At the same time, she thought that it is too presumptuous, but for her, a man like Haikon is too dangerous. Her companion remarked that, in any case, she didn't think that it was quite reckless of the girl to think of both of her own just because of the fear of her older brother. And besides, even a month has not passed since they lived together. The girl thought that this was the kind of answer she should have expected. The woman saw her sad face and apologized, but just as an exalted one, she can understand Haikon. They Sublime, however, are very lonely. That's why the woman hopes that the girl and her brother will get closer. If she needs help with that, just let her tell her. The protagonist thought that these are quite warm words, but here is whether she can get closer better with her brother. Still, when we look at his eyes, then literally loses the gift of speech. And because of that, she can't say anything to him. The girl thinks that Haikon has long ago guessed that the Duchess of Bluefort favors her. That's what he said, that her relationship with Duchess Blueport is much better than he thought. It turns out that what he said just gave the girl goosebumps. However, lack of regression is not progress. Everything went wrong literally from the very beginning. The girl was making a naive hand and sister of herself, which was crazy about her own brother. The girl was now outside of Haikon's office, who was sitting at his desk. As she did so, she looked around the room and thought that if she wanted to stay here, she would have to continue to show her love for her brother. Still, just his mere existence alone made the girl shiver. The heroine realized that nothing was on her mind but that, and immediately she cried out to her brother. She thought that she still wanted to cry 24 hours for 7 days, but she has to pretend that everything is fine. During that period when Professor Mashu was teaching the girl origami, then she learned how to make a wish-fulfilling turtle, and now she brought it to Haikon. The heroine approached the guy and asked if he could just look at it. She wished with you, the one looked right into her soul. There was the same turtle that she made out of paper. The brother in turn asked what it was. The girl smiled sweetly and said that it was a turtle that would grant her any wish. Then she wanted to say something else to him, but the guy grabbed her and drove her out of the office. at the same time shouted that he did not need anything at all and let her just go out. In the end, it turned out that, of course, the heroine was rejected, as always. Immediately after that, the girl crouched near the turtle that lay on the ground and asked him that she humiliate Haikon in front of everyone. But as a consequence of her request, unfortunately, nothing happened. Soon, she also learned to draw in order to make a gift for her brother, and she thought that she would just draw Haikon, that is, his portrait. After a while, that very drawing of her brother was ready, and the girl presented it to him. When the boy saw it, he wondered who it was that she had drawn the devil. The girl thought it was him after all, but really he was the devil himself. Her brother said that there was nothing wrong with it. After a while at the table, the girl turned to her brother and asked if he was free today and how he was doing. But he only coldly stated that she should close her mouth. The girl thought that he would at least greet his sister for decency. That's why the heroine ate alone and thought that she was so lonely at this time. And all this because it turned out she had been eating alone for a whole week, although she realized that it is so senseless for her to think about tyrants. But in principle, the protagonist was happy that at least he was not going to sell her. Now she was outside making a wreath of flowers, so she thought he was going out really in a sweetheart, and that part of her plan. While the girl was doing this, only she was approached by a gardener whose name was Bucky. He inquired later if it was for his master. The girl smiled and noticed that he had indeed guessed. The interlocutor inquired if the gentleman really loved his brother so much. The heroine noticed that the end may be so and asked if he would appreciate her gift. The guy remarked that he didn't doubt it at all, since it was from her. The main heroine did not particularly believe it, and she thought that he is not above know her. After all, it turns out that so far, whatever gift she gave him, he did not like anything. Then she said that she thought, and the guy also needs a wreath like this. She then held it out to the lad, and he wondered if the mistress had made it for him. The girl noticed that he really helped her a lot to gather flowers. That was why he asked her to come closer. After that, she put him a no check on his head, and with a smile on her face noticed that Bucky is really very cute. The heroine thought that immediately she got busy with all this. Then she would also make a few wreaths for the Duchess of Blueport. Her skills were getting better and better each time. Wreaths gave her already literally in the helmet, and even the maids were no exception. And here in his hands, he possessed a wreath and thought that remained only for Haikon. As suddenly the girl remembered, then almost forgot about the most important thing. One day, the original story of the Labyrinth of Ouroboros was born, and it was from that story that the protagonist knew Haikon's main secret, and that was his allergy to pollen. Because of this, the heroine immediately began to wonder why then she was even making it all this time. Then she put the wreath on the ground and thought she would think of something else for her brother. And then she successfully ran off somewhere. The brother stood in his study and watched what his little sister was doing. The butler was also in the study, who said that such a younger sister must be very pleased with the guy. The newly minted duke, in turn, remarked that it was a pretty bad joke, and then added curtly, "To get that damn wreath out of his eyes already." After all, the man at this time also had a wreath on his head, which was given to him by the heroine. He further sat down on a chair and thought that Dahlia Pasteros was his only sister. This girl was very desperately wanted by the Duchess, but she is just an ordinary child. On their first meeting, he had made the decision to get rid of her if she became a burden to him. The guy wanted to see if there was anything in common in this girl's mind, but she doesn't seem to think about anything at all. After all she knows how to do is talk relentlessly while eating. Or she can still do some strange things. But since there's nothing else the girl is capable of, he'll just get her comfortable for now, and then he'll capitalize and eliminate her. Of course, he's still a bit pissed off by her constant presence within a 5-meter radius as well as her useless gifts and fake friendliness. After a while, the girl stood pensive and realized that everything was going according to her plan. After all, it turns out that she only had money left to save for her own independent life. Next to her was her nanny, and the girl turned to Darylyn. From her, she inquired if she would always be at ease with her. The woman remarked that, of course, whose side would she be on if not with her mistress? The girl remarked with a sweet look that she knew it so, and then declared that she needed money. The interlocutor was very much surprised and asked what she meant. At that moment, the girl thought that if she had said that she needed that money to escape, Nanny would have stopped her, just as the Duchess of Blueport had done not long ago. The heroine made a sad look and remarked that suddenly her brother would make it a point to throw her out of the house. But even it would turn out that even a penny would not be too much for her. After a moment, the girl began to think whether it worked or not, as always. The woman immediately approached the girl and took her hands. While doing so, she stated that her mistress was very poor, but she wanted to believe that her brother would not do such a thing. But she could hardly believe it. So she asked you later what she could do for her. The main character was very happy with this turn of events, that her nanny took her side. In doing so, she stated that first of all they should sell her dress and all her jewelry. The nanny stated that she would certainly like to sell them all, but they could be caught by the authorized maids. Eventually, the girl's assistant was able to sell the little dress and jewelry without being suspected. But all this did not last long at all, for the girl heard the word maid. I wondered why this mistress and began to disappear clothes, and they should check everything more thoroughly. That's when the girl and realized that they seemed to have nothing look. After a while, the girl was lying in her room and thought that although she could not make money this way all the time, a little money had already been collected. In front of her was a box with her written diaries, as well as gold coins that were rolled up and in a cloth. For all of this, the girl thanked her assistant Darylyn. After the joy, the girl was sad, because she did not understand how she could get more. At the same time, she did not want to load her own nanny to do all the work for her. After a while, the protagonist in the again was to start drinking her duchess. There, the girl told the woman what she does. Then the same interlocutor asked if indeed she was saving money, and also asked Dahlia if she did not practice, and in making a strong impression on her. The girl, in turn, said of the duchess that it was really very important to her. She smiled and stated that as far as she knew, the former Duke Pasteros kept many valuable books in his study, so that's where the girl should go. The protagonist realized that it was to think that way, then her late father had entrusted countless books, and perhaps in his office there really are some rare editions. Secretly, the books hidden by the girl could later be sold. That was exactly what the heroine's plan was. But suddenly, one of the books fell out of her hands because she saw the guy next to her. The newly minted Duke wondered what she was up to here. The girl was shocked and did not understand why he was here, and she could not understand why everything turned out like this at this time. After a while, the girl sat about her nanny treating her wound. The girl's knee was shattered and she said she was in a lot of pain. The woman, however, wondered how the young mistress could have hurt herself like that. The girl stated that she had hurt herself while playing near the stairs outside the library. The woman remarked that thank God she hadn't hurt herself too badly then. Further, she inquired if it was possible that the young gentleman had come there. The heroine immediately began to remember what had happened to her in the library. When she devised her plan to find the books, she immediately went to her father's library. After she entered there, she realized that it was perfect because no one was there and she had to hurry. Then she took a closer look at the rack of books that was in front of her and realized that there seems to be nothing there that could be sold. Further, the girl considered more and more and then noticed the stairs. Climbing it, the heroine looked at the books that were higher up. But still, this activity was quite scary for her, and she thought that she should hurry up and get down from there. At that, she decided that she should think about it for a while. It turns out that if you look closely, most books are about the sublime. And to be more specific than that, all these books are about how creepy and dangerous they really are. After a few moments, the girl came across one green book and immediately pulled it out. Taking a better look, she saw that this book was the story of the origins of the sublime. Upon opening the book, the heroine realized that it was literally a first edition, and she could definitely make a fortune if she did sell this book. But the joy and reflection of the girl was immediately interrupted by a guy who entered the library too. He asked what the girl here forgot his, as always, cold voice. Naturally, the heroine did not expect that the guy came here and was very much frightened, screamed at that. And it also comes out that she lost her balance and immediately fell down the stairs she was on. Her brother continued to look at her superficially and noticed that it seems that girls really like to scamper around the office. He then walked closer and picked up the very book that the girl had been holding before. He then opened it up and read a few lines. It said that the sublime could not be called ordinary people, or were quite unlike them. And he noticed that that was exactly what it said. Again, he turned his eyes to the girl and wondered if the same opinion was given about them or not. The heroine very much began to panic and thought why the hell she was caught by him, and even with such a dubious book in his hands at that. At this very moment, her intuition told her that if she said something wrong now, all her plans would fall apart. After all, it turns out that the sweet and innocent little sister read behind the back of her older brother books with similar content, and it turns out that On the Concrete screwed up this situation. The girl declared that she was just friends with the Duchess of Blueport, and could she think that about her? While doing so, she thought what a good girl she was for coming up with that. She also remarked that she just wished she knew more about the sublime so she could understand her little brother. The guy immediately asked if she really wanted to understand him. Next, he came closer to the girl and immediately pushed the book he was holding right into her. At the same time, he said that it was impossible for the girl to understand him. Then he looked at the heroine, who did not know what to do and was spinning back and forth. That's why he stated that the girl fell down in confusion. After that, he started talking about the former Duke of the Pesteros family and asked if the girl knew how their grandfather died. The protagonist, in turn, knew that their grandfather had lost his mind due to a magical explosion and died shortly afterward. The deity sat next to stated that he had destroyed the mansion and also tried to kill his own daughter, who was their mother. The fear of the sublime had not left this woman since that time, and after all, he is also an exalted one with immense power. Therefore, she could not get rid of the thought that one day he would simply kill her. That's why it just so happened that he was kicked out of the mansion because of his superhuman strength. The girl was in a huge shock after that and thought that in the original story there was definitely no word about it. Next, the guy asked what about Dahlia. The girl thought that she didn't even realize that Haikon was kicked out just because of his power. The heroine wondered if this was the very explanation for his constant absence from the mansion all these long years. Although it turns out that now is definitely not the best time for such thoughts, or if she continues to keep silent, things could turn out badly. After that, he continued to make a regular girl out of herself and remarked that her only brother was a very nice person. The guy stood up and simply agreed with this, while literally staring silently at nothing, and as if then her words had no meaning towards him. After that, he turned around and leisurely began to leave the room at which they were not. The protagonist looked in his direction with horror and with incomprehension and immediately thought. She remembered the words of the Duchess, who had said that they sublime were indeed very lonely. Haikon had claimed that his own sister could never understand him, and here the girl wondered if there was a reason why he had become so lonely. The girl remembered that there was one scene in the original story, and that conversation took place after the kidnapping of the protagonist, Adelicia. And here in front of the eyes of the heroine, that very scene when Adelicia was talking to Haikon. The girl then told him that it's not too late because everything can be fixed. And all this is because they understand each other now. The guy stood next to her and was covered in blood, but he noticed that the word is not going to happen. He is taught that now nothing can be changed because she will never love and understand him. As a consequence, it turns out that they have no other choice. Remembering those moments when the heroine went through the game, she cursed him throughout the game after that moment. In general, this is because she thought that the protagonist was angels incarnate, because she could sympathize with a scoundrel like him. However, now she was wondering what Haikon himself was experiencing at that moment. The maid, who was treating the girl's wounds, noticed that the lady was hurt and didn't understand how he could leave so quietly. Still, it comes out that it is very cruel even for him. The heroine thought that even though Darylyn said that the wound was not serious, but still the wound hurt. She further remembered her brother and remarked that the maid was not telling the truth, for he was not cruel at all. The maid wanted to say something about it, but the girl interrupted her. With a smile on her face, she said that if she tried harder, the day would come when her brother would love her. The nanny declared that her mistress was just a poor girl. The girl, in turn, remarked to her that she would just not cry now. Suddenly, she looked to see that the door to their room was ajar and some silhouette was standing there. That was why she wondered who had even bowed their ears to their conversation. It was still pretty good that she hadn't said anything bad now. The book from the library and the girl had secretly hidden it in her journal box. That book was too big, so they had to change it. Irony couldn't believe that she had to suffer like this because she definitely wouldn't get much money. At this very time, the protagonist's brother came out to his office with aggression. He was angry at this moment and thought that all this is stupid because initially he wanted to intimidate the girl to stop doing all this nonsense. But here, it was literally worth it just to look into her eyes, and he started talking about his past right away. It also turns out that he was the one standing by the door of the room where the maid had given the girl first aid. And he heard that if he tried hard enough, the day would come when to take and who loved her at that moment. He thought it was some nonsense. The guy realized that Dahlia continued to pester him all this time from their acquaintance to this day. At this time, he remembered their first meeting when he swung his arm and realized that the girl was definitely scared then. But still in her gaze, there was genuine concern then. It turns out that this girl who didn't care about the death of her own father and worried about her brother. The guy realized that absolutely no one looked at him the way she looked at him. That's why when he looked at her, he immediately had a strange feeling. After a moment, he slapped the table and remarked that it was all just nonsense. Next, he went and sat down on the couch, continuing to ponder this whole situation. It turns out, as he had told Dahlia, the mother is the former Duchess of Pastos after all. After her father's passing, she had hated his over-enthusiastic ways so much that she began to deny her identity. Of course, she didn't want her child to become an exalted. It wasn't worth worrying if the child wasn't as smart or obedient. The main thing was that it should be just like all the other children, and by no means exalted. However, it so happened that the woman found out that her firstborn did turn out to be sublime. He grew quickly and was also intelligent, independent, and determined at that. But still, he was just like her father, which meant that he too could become demented. At the time, when the boy was only 3 years old, a friend of her mom's took her son to their mansion. The mom then greeted the girl and thanked her for visiting them, and the guys went off on their own. It just so happened that the same guy had been insulting Haikon the entire time he was visiting. He was pointing his finger at the boy and saying he was sublime. That's what his mother had said. Next, he inquired what the boy was playing with, for he wanted that too. After a moment, he produced the very toy and broke it on purpose. Next, he smiled and apologized and told him about how it broke right after he touched it. This moment made Haikon very angry, for he realized that this guy had done it on purpose. That's why he grabbed that boy and pushed him down the stairs. That very boy fell down the stairs and broke his leg because of that. After that very incident, his mom said that he did it on purpose, and it turned out that she had developed an even greater dislike for him. Sometime after that, Dahlia was born. It turns out that after the birth of the first son, the woman was informed that she was infertile. That is why the guy was just clueless as to how she was able to get pregnant. As a consequence, little thought that it was God's blessing to her. In the end, the guy became the only stain in his own mother's life. After a time, he was told that the reason he was taken out of the house was because he lacked the experience to become the next heir. And after his own mother died, he was incarcerated for 10 years. It came about because his mother had written in her will that she asked that her son not be removed to this estate. Because of that, it so happens that he was only able to return here after both his parents died. He then looked at the picture of his mother and thought that they had really abandoned him, and he was definitely not going to forgive them just yet. To top it all off, of course, he would never love this child either. He continued to sit there thinking, and it seemed to him that he was completely confused. Time slowly passed, and it had been 6 months since the girl had started living with her brother. It turns out that it is still trying to tie Haikon to her. Since she is still a little girl, she is a little scared. So, once again, she came to him and brought him fruit, but the guy kicked her out. Still, after that very incident in the library, the brother no longer seemed so scary to the girl. Now it turns out that the girl has a much worse problem. And all this because her pot is not boiling at all now. The heroine was walking down the corridor of the estate and thought that she should continue to flip a kind, naive, and yet stupid sister. But still, her scraggly imagination was already literally on the limit, and she did not understand what she could think of. The girl approached the butler Sebastian and addressed him. The man immediately sat down beside her and asked what the mistress needed from him. The girl remarked that she needed to ask how she could please her brother. The man looked at that cute face of the girl, sadly remarked that Mistress Dahlia was doing just fine as it was. The girl continued to smile sweetly at him and seemed to realize that she had accidentally won his heart. That's why she won't ask him anything more. After a while, the protagonist was on the street with the Duchess. They had a small picnic at this time, and the woman wondered if the girl wanted to find a way to please her brother. The heroine looked at her and nodded approvingly at this. The Duchess laughed and said that it was still better than hiding money. She then turned to the maid and asked her to give her the first paper. At this time, the heroine looked at all this with astonishment and did not understand what her interlocutor wanted to do. The woman wrote something and said that in order to become a true Duke of Pastos, Hikanu needed the approval of another sublime. Needs someone who could confirm his normal psychological state. The girl realized something that she was doing very badly. Next, she cried out for the woman not to do it. And all this because she knew exactly what could happen in the future. It turns out that the Duchess of Blueport could be in trouble for such kindness. The woman stated that it was fine, as it was just a ceremony. She then handed the paper to the girl and remarked that she hoped her and her brother's relationship would improve a lot. The heroine thought that their relationship and stubbornness needed it, but the fact that the Duchess is helping her is embarrassing to accept. That's why the girl was embarrassed and noticed that she was very grateful to the woman. Immediately upon arriving home, the girl had to make an effort to give this to Haikon. She was walking down the hallway, thinking he wouldn't tear it up right after he saw it. After a while, the girl reached the study where her brother was sitting. Next, she looked into the study and turned to the guy, and he in turn looked at her. After a moment, she entered the office and showed Haikon the very paper that the Duchess had given her. She further inquired if she had a great idea since the Duchess of Blueport had helped her. The girl wanted to say something else, but suddenly her brother interrupted her. As a consequence, he said that yesterday he received the agreement of the Emperor, so it was not at all necessary. The girl did not expect to hear such information at all, and was shocked, but still really realized that if you think about it well, the original story Haikon and the Emperor really know each other very well. It turns out that the Emperor is also an exalted one, and it goes without saying that he helped Haikon become a duke. The heroine sadly immediately apologized to her brother and remarked that she thought it might be good for him. Suddenly, the lad snatched the paper out of her hands and remarked that the one she was might be needed for something else. He then read it carefully and remarked to the girl that she could leave. She, in turn, thought how it might be needed. After all, isn't it to pay off a debt? But after all, their family is not short of money. So it didn't make sense to the girl why he would need it. The butler had told her the other day that the Pastos family didn't need the agreement of other families other than the exalted ones. But still, she had been so frightened that she had taken the document and secretly given it to the Duchess of Blueport. Still, it turned out that the missing Haikon never noticed, and it was because of this girl was even more unclear why he then took the document back. Contrary to Duchess Blueport's expectations, Haikon continued to ignore his own sister. Because he hadn't harmed anyone, the girl had stopped being completely afraid of him. The girl was lying in her room and thought she wanted a cake. Suddenly, the door of the room she was in immediately opened, and the girl screamed in surprise. The guy noticed that it was him. The frightened girl immediately asked her brother what had happened. He, in turn, said that His Majesty had agreed to give an audience. It turns out that the last step leading Haikon to become a duke under Imperial patronage, he will receive the title. The girl thought that the request sent the other day turns out to be approved, and this is great news. But still, are they not close enough to talk about it? It turns out that the Duchess smiled to her brother and noticed that she congratulates him. The interlocutor remarked that His Majesty wanted her to come. It will take place the day after tomorrow at 12 o'clock at the palace, so it turns out that she should be ready. The heroine, for her part, was simply shocked at what she heard. She asked her brother with great surprise if she had to go there too, and he remarked that yes. The girl understood that Haikon alone was enough to get the title, but it was unclear why she was needed there. The brother then stood and looked at the girl for a while, waiting to see what she would say. The heroine was very scared. That's why she did not say anything, but just nodded in response to her brother. Immediately after that, the brother turned around and leisurely began to leave her room. The girl thought that he got the answer and immediately left, because he is simply unbearable. At last, she thought that he at least fell, but as usual, nothing happened. After that, the heroine realized that there was nothing she could do, because the order of the emperor, so she has no choice at all. At this time, the nanny came into the girl's room with tea, and noticed that this real tea for a sound sleep. The girl, in turn, stunned her by telling Darlin that she was expected at the palace the day after tomorrow. The woman wondered what she had just said, and then added that what tea was there now, for she was going to get a new dress for her mistress. 2 days had passed since this very conversation. The protagonist stood in her room and was already fully dressed up and in a beautiful new dress. She looked at herself in the mirror and thought, so she wouldn't eat the same song in her. It looked very cute and innocent. Next to her was her nanny, who was telling the girl that she would be even more beautiful when she grew up. Hearing these words, the girl immediately thought that if only she would live to see that time, it will be so. Here, after a short gathering, the heroine began to go outside to get into the carriage and leave. On the threshold of the girl was waiting for her brother, and she thought if he really was her own person waiting for her, because she did not expect such a thing. Then she hurried downstairs and thanked her brother for waiting for her. The girl thought that, of course, her older brother would not take her hand. That was why she leisurely climbed into the carriage and sat down there. Her brother said nothing, and also leisurely got in and seated himself beside the girl, and then they went on their way. After a while by the roadside, the heroine asked her brother why His Majesty had invited her. The guy, in turn, did not even look at the girl and did not answer her anything, as if ignoring her. Because of this, she sat very confused, not understanding what had happened and why he did not answer her. She wondered if her brother had gotten off on the wrong foot again and was doing such things. After a while, they arrived at their destination. The brother was the first to get out of the carriage, and then the coachman helped the girl out, holding her hand. The boy noticed this, and the girl thanked the man for it. Then, together, they went to the palace. The girl still didn't understand why Hikon was hovering in the clouds all this time. To her, he seemed really very strange today. Suddenly, the guy asked that Dahlia hurry up, and the girl immediately agreed. After a while, they did arrive at the Imperial reception room from the palace. The inside of this room was very beautiful and also very expensive looking. That was why the girl became bewildered for a while, looking at all this beauty. After a little bit of daydreaming, the girl together with her brother still headed deep into the interior of this room, where His Highness was waiting for them. He, upon seeing the arriving authorities, declared that they were here at last. Further, quite nicely, he smiled at them. This man is the current emperor, and his plant is Alexander Duncan Michelo II. The heroine knew that this is a young emperor who is a little over 30 years old. You get out that in the original story he was also a sublime, but because of his age, he was not a target. His ability was the ability to read people's emotions through physical contact. That was why he could immediately recognize their true feeling for him. Here was the girl in front of the emperor, ducking in front of him, greeting the man. He, in turn, looked intently at the girl, and the heroine thought that, of course, diplomacy is not his end. And all this because it turns out he used his superior restraint and controlled himself to the point of death. Suddenly, the emperor said that he had already seen one of them, but this person was new to him. That is why he inquired whether it was Lady Dahlia Pesteros or the girl. The heroine immediately dodged and stated that she was very pleased with their meeting with His Highness. The interlocutor seated himself on his throne and, smiling, declared that they must dispense with the formality. It would come out, after all, that the Lady Dahlia also bore the surname of Pesteros. Then stated that he had called her as she deserved to be present at the Pesteros initiation ceremony. He further inquired as to what the girl had to say about her only brother. It turns out, after all, that he wondered if he was offending her. The girl immediately thought that she simply cannot turn her tongue to say that he treats her badly. That's why the girl smiled sweetly and noticed that he does not offend her at all, because her only brother is really very caring. It is because of this that the heroine trusts him completely. The emperor smiled and asked with detachment whether the girl is not afraid of him. Still, this man is definitely not someone to rely on. The girl did not answer anything, realizing that this is really so. And the man continued to say that in any case, having such a cute little sister was a blessing. After a moment, he turned to the girl's brother and asked for him to come over. Hikon immediately approached him, and the emperor took the envelope to hand to him. After Alexander handed over the envelope, he immediately stated that Hikon was now the Duke of Pesteros. The boy immediately dodged him and stated to His Majesty that he thanked him for it. The girl, when she heard this, then thought that he was somehow insincere in saying all this. Then the emperor said that he had a lot of things to do, and he needed to finish it all as soon as possible. That was why he told Lady Dahlia to come to him too, and the girl immediately agreed. He wondered why someone like Hikon was getting so much love from his little sister. The girl shyly stated that she was embarrassed right now. The interlocutor continued talking and stated that perhaps she did not know that through life, loneliness accompanies the sublime. As it happens, the girl must be helping him without noticing it herself. Hikon immediately wanted to appeal to His Majesty not to say that. But the emperor interrupted him and with a smile on his face remarked that he understood it too. The girl's brother remarked that His Majesty was mistaken when he said that, but his interlocutor said that he certainly didn't think so. The man held out his hand to the girl and thanked her that it was only out of his whim that she had come here. The girl looked at the hand in front of her and thought that the emperor always shakes hands at the end of every meeting. After all, it turns out that he wants to create a friendly atmosphere instead of formalities. However, it turns out that he just wants to read someone else's emotions. Even though the girl realizes it, she just can't refuse this handshake. That's why she shook his hand, and the man did not let her go for a long time. The heroine at this time became uncomfortable, and she thought why he did not let go of her hand. His look, in turn, was somehow frightened, and the girl turned to His Majesty. He, in turn, came to his senses at once and looked at his hand carefully. The girl, along with her brother, looked at him, not understanding what was going on. And then the emperor apologized to Dahlia and asked with you, she had forgotten about it. The girl smiled at him and stated that everything was basically fine. At that thought, she was very scared about it. Alexander further stated that the girl should know that he was wondering why such a charming lady still didn't have a partner. He inquired about the girl thinking about his son. The heroine immediately smiled and remarked that His Majesty was such a joker. At the same time thought that he really has a problem with his humor. But suddenly the emperor and stated that it wasn't a joke at all. And all this was because he was really serious when he said it. The protagonist realized that this was really true and immediately became very embarrassed. Such a thing she definitely did not expect and did not understand what she should do in this situation. The girl, not realizing what was happening, wondered if he really wasn't joking. The man kept talking about how he had sons her age, and his sons' names are Renaud and Cedric. He also added that he thought it wasn't worth mentioning that Renaud is the crown prince. It turns out he's a good guy, although he can be a bit silly at times. And second son Cedric is enterprising, but not a bad young man. Looking at the emperor's smile, the girl thought that she still doubted the seriousness of his intentions. After a few moments, she realized that his facial expression told her otherwise. She wondered if he was really serious about this. Well, it turns out that it is. He so unobtrusively hinted at the engagement. But still, the heroine can't figure out if it just sounds like that to me. She kept thinking about the fact that, of course, aristocrats get engaged pretty early in life. It turns out that if the emperor's intentions are really firm, then her brother simply has no reason to refuse. It turns out that this is a once-in-a-million chance. Hikon gets a chance to get rid of his useless sister by marrying her off to a prince. However, if she is engaged to the prince, every person will recognize her from the newspapers. And if this happens, it will be very bad, because then all her plans will come to naught. After all, the girl up to this point wanted to escape and live a free life, having accumulated money. That is why the protagonist hesitated and said some incomprehensible words. Suddenly, she was approached by her brother. The girl thought that she was screwed up again. She only had to wait for the day of execution. But suddenly, her brother told His Highness that they were not at all agreed on the engagement. He went on to say that she simply could not marry. The emperor inquired if he was telling the truth. The interlocutor stated that it was, for it was the purest truth. The girl was very happy to hear this, and thought that she was so happy to hear his voice that it was like a sip of water on a sweltering day. The emperor inquired, but why was it that he spoke like that? Hikon remarked that he didn't think the princes would like the idea. His interlocutor got upset and stated that it was really a pity. It was coming out, after all, of that he was so eager for Dahlia to be his little girl. The girl heard this and looked at him, and because of that she thought it was a joke. But still, she didn't understand how one could joke like that with a stone face. After a few moments, the protagonist's brother asked if they could bow out already. The emperor said that of course they could do that. The girl, in turn, turned to His Majesty and shivered at that. At that moment, she thanked him for this fine offer and for taking care of her. The man, seeing this a little, got embarrassed and then stated to Dahlia that he would wait for their next meeting, and also with Hikon too. After a while, the protagonist along with her brother did leave the emperor alone. He met on his throne and immediately plunged into reflection. The man knew that initially the sublime were envied by everyone, and this was because they were superior to other people in many ways. However, the sublime were literally forever experiencing trials of pain as well as loneliness. The man often wondered if it was because they were informed by the inaccessibility of others. It is the very power that destroys their minds. All that is left inside is the desire to destroy and burn everything to the ground. He, for his part, tries to be a friendly, patient, and understanding emperor. Still, he doesn't want to see the people he cares about suffer and the world crumble. However, recently, when he held the girl's hand, he literally had an epiphany in that moment. It turns out that just for a moment, he went back to the past, where there was still nothing at all. At that moment, when he touched her hand, it was as if a mountain had fallen from his shoulders. The man realized that it was all just nonsense, because the soul, affected by the effects of magic, cannot be restored. That's why he didn't understand why he had such stupid thoughts in his head now. Still, to be honest, the emperor is a bit worried about them. Although Hikon tries to appear mature, he is still a child at heart. He's at that age when he wants to follow his feelings, and it could hurt his family's business. The emperor realized that he might make a mistake that he would regret for the rest of his life. At this moment, he and the heroine were walking together from the emperor's reception room, and the girl twisted her leg. At the time when they left the emperor, the brother did not stop and just walked forward. The heroine looked at this and thought that he really wasn't waiting for her at all. Then she began to reflect on the whole situation that happened and thought that at least us could survive. Already she wanted to say goodbye to her plans because of her engagement to some princes. After a short thought, she thanked her brother. She thanked him because she didn't like the whole engagement thing. Her brother stopped and stated that His Majesty was making fun of everyone like that, though it turns out that if the girl agrees, he will remind her of it for the rest of her life. It also means that only idiots believe him. The girl heard this and thought that as usual, but her brother would never say a kind word. On the way, she wondered if he could even walk even a little slower. Further down the road, the chaser said that he was surprised that the girl would react like that. As a consequence, he wondered if that was what girls usually wanted. The heroine kept trying to keep up with him and couldn't string a word together. Losing strength, she remarked that, if possible, she would like to stay with him longer. Her speech was slurred, for she was short of breath. The brother stated that his sister had not misunderstood him, but that he simply did not want the Pesteros family to be considered idiots. The girl stated that she understood all of that and immediately apologized. Suddenly, she made some strange sound and immediately sat down. The brother heard it and turned around to see what was wrong. The girl, in turn, sat and wondered what was going on with her today. The guy saw his sister, sadly exhaled, and then came closer to her. At the same time, the girl saw him coming and apologized to her brother. He in turn stated to her that she was in fact being stupid. Further, he easily lifted the girl and threw her on his shoulder. The main character did not expect such a turn of events and was very shocked at that moment. The girl began to kick then, and the guy declared that she should calm down if she did not want to fall. At the same time, the girl calmed down and hugged her brother gently. At the same time, she thought that after all, although he was scary and human, but today he helped her. and she remembered the moment when the guy tried to help her with the Emperor. The protagonist realized that if things continued like this, as they were now, they could really get along. Still, it would be very nice if her plan worked after all. The girl said that her brother was so tall after all. She thought that, based on the script, she knew how tall he would be in the future. The brother was surprised to hear the girl tell him that. She smiled sweetly and remarked that she just felt like it, so to speak. The guy sadly exhaled again and remarked that it was nonsense. But the heroine didn't care about that, because she was joyful at that moment, while thinking that she was glad if their relationship remained as warm. After all, because of his good attitude, she literally feels great. The girl further stated that she was very happy that she could hug her brother like this. As a consequence, she asked if he would love her back if she continued to love him. At that very moment, it just so happened that she crossed the line. The brother immediately stopped and inquired if she wanted him to love her. The girl didn't take out what was going to happen, and suddenly the guy grabbed her and threw her to the ground. He then stood right above her and penetrated her with his cold, as always, gaze. The girl looked into his eyes very much frightened and did not understand what could happen next. The guy turned to her and the girl asked him what he wanted. The interlocutor asked if he should repeat that he would never love her. He also wanted the heroine not to misunderstand him. Now the girl was sitting on the ground and did not understand why he was like this again at this moment. Still, she had very much hoped that they would not get along. She had thought so, but she had turned out to be such an idiot. Then she pretended to be a nice sister as usual and remarked that everything would be just as her brother had said. And in doing so, she thought about him slipping on a banana and breaking his leg. After a while, she overtook her brother and was the first to climb into the carriage. No help was needed, for she did it deftly. But when she got into the carriage, she sat down not in her seat, but in Haikon's. He stopped and looked at the girl intently. The heroine also looked at him and thought that no matter how hard-headed he was, he would definitely not kill her little sister because of the seat he had taken away. Still, it turned out as she thought, and the guy just sat down in her seat. After a while, the cabman announced that they were not departing. The carriage rushed along the road, and the girl together with the guy sat and looked in different directions. The heroine thought about the situation that happened and wondered why he immediately refused. The girl thought that when her brother caught her in the library with a questionable book in her hands, she hoped that this one would not happen again. It turns out that now that she was in his arms, he had the atmosphere at his disposal. It turns out that she doesn't know the cause and has no idea what to do about it. Now it seemed to her that everything was literally back to normal. The heroine wondered if perhaps she should just say goodbye to him. After that, the protagonist felt some strange sound. She immediately began to scrutinize the carriage to see what the cause of that sound was, and the moment she looked to the side, she saw a huge crack that went straight across the entire wall. The girl realized that it was the same crack that was created by Haikon. After a moment, the girl looked up and saw that the crack had spread to the entire carriage. She then stared for a few seconds at how much it was spreading. And so it turns out that not even a minute later, the back of the carriage began to fall off because the crack had spread all around. That's exactly where the main character was, who was now falling backwards. The brother saw this and was shocked, and the girl could not do anything and could not hold on either. The protagonist at that moment very much panicked and immediately pulled her arms, turning to her brother. She really wanted him to help her at that moment and save her. But that's when she looked into his eyes and remembered that moment when he said that he would never love her. That's why she realized that there was literally no reason for him to save her right now. As a consequence, she began to let go of the very hand she had been reaching for her brother before. In doing so, it was blowing in. Could this be the end of her story, and now they were going to die? Literally at the last moment, when the girl had already lost all hope of rescue, her brother grabbed her hand, trying to save her. Such a girl in no way expected, he thought. Did he really save her? For her, it was literally a miracle, because she had already lost all hope for her savior. Because of all this happened, she immediately plunged into thinking that he saved her, and probably it's because she has a surname Pasteros and can at least somewhere useful. But in any case, the girl was happy that she was alive. That's why mentally she promised her brother that when he became the greatest villain, she would save him anyway. Of course, it is true to say that he will want to refuse her help, but she will still help, and at least then maybe he will feel something towards her. Even so, she continues to prepare to escape, but she remains a sweet and silly little sister. After a while, the protagonist was in her room and lying in her bed. At the same time, she was immersed in sleep and she dreamed all this brother. After a while, the girl did pull away. Their eyes met the gaze of her brother. Still, she could not believe that he was beside her and wondered if it was a dream. To make sure it was unreal, the girl immediately stood up and looked closely at her brother. Next, she let her gaze travel downward and saw his hand. Her older brother's hand was lying beside her hand on the bed very close by. That's why the girl immediately grabbed his hand with both of her hands and shocked the guy with it. He very carefully looked at her incomprehensible look, and the girl, in turn, said that even though he hates him, but she, in any case, will not stop loving him. After that, the girl realized that she had said the wrong thing, for she had blurted it out. She should have said that she would help him. Then she felt that she was literally falling asleep at that moment. And so after a while, her strength left her, and she immediately lay down on the bed, falling asleep. After his brother saw that his little sister had fallen asleep, he tried to touch her with his hand. But at the last moment, he did not do so, and just put his hand next to the girl. While doing so, he looked at his cute little sister carefully and started thinking about the whole situation. He realized that it didn't matter if he was ignoring her or trying to scare her. The girl always looks him straight in the eyes. Now he had that brief moment in front of his eyes when the girl had declared that even though he hated her, she would not stop loving him. He realized that while the girl was falling, the way he was thinking that it would be all right if she died now, and he didn't have to save her. He decided that from now on, no one would make him hesitate, for he no longer relied on his family. The guy further recalled the words of the emperor telling the girl that she should be helping him herself without noticing it. Also looked at Haikon and noticed that he should realize it too. The newly minted duke understood that, just as the emperor had said then, he was shocked at the girl's boldness in thinking she could hold his hand. At that very moment, all of his emotions had literally thrown him off balance. In the end, the real child, his parents, the one he was so eager to get rid of, turned out to be his only sister. Still, when the girl pitched, he really wanted to let go of her fall. But he simply couldn't let go of her hand that reached out to him and made him hesitate just then. The guy wondered if she had noticed all of this at that moment. Also, he did not realize when his sister would wake up what he would have to do then at all. All these thoughts plagued Haikon's head for a long time, and he sat right over the girl and pondered all this. After a while, the weather was very sunny. At one of the moments, the protagonist woke up from that dream. When she came to her senses, she immediately remembered that she had dreamed about Haikon. At that very time, the girl was approached and wondered if she had finally woken up. The girl immediately turned her attention to the person who was asking all this. Next to me, she saw the duchess, who was sitting up and worrying about her. The girl, in turn, was very happy to see her and wondered why she had come. The woman remarked that still she was worried, for she had almost gotten into trouble. And also, another reason why she had come here was because Haikon had become a duke. It was because of this that she was very happy that the audience had gone well. The girl, in turn, stated to her that it didn't go particularly well. After that, together they began to chat, and the protagonist told the whole situation as it happened. It turns out that in the end, her brother still saved her. In the end, he hesitated until the very end, and she already thought that she was literally finished. The woman heard this information, only smiled, and then stated that Grand Duke Pasteros are still quite dishonest even towards her. It still comes out that the sublime have a knack for looking at those around them in terms of usefulness. Perhaps the girl really did make a good point when she spoke earlier. After all, it could still be that her rescue was part of her brother's plan. However, one should not jump to conclusions as they live together. It seems he is beginning to feel her concern, and yet is the same person, but only with abilities. That is why girls should not jump to conclusions and should not worry. After these words of her interlocutor, the girl thought about his aloof appearance and what he was doing. The woman, in turn, saw that the girl was thinking about something and turned to her again. To her, the Duchess stated that, to be honest, she had also previously had a very difficult character. The girl was very much surprised and asked if it was really a joke. The interlocutor remarked that she was not lying after all. So it turns out that in childhood, she was a real selfish person. And all this is because it seemed to her all this time that only the sublime could understand her. All her antics came to the point that even meeting with her own husband, the girl tried to avoid. No matter how much the guy did not want to meet with her or did not try to do it, the girl tried to avoid him. The heroine was a little embarrassed by this and waited to see what the Duchess would say next. The woman, in turn, saw the girl looking this way and laughed. Then stated that despite all the things she had brushed off earlier, then his love still reached her heart. As a result, it just so happened that since then, she started to get along with other people. She stopped being closed off and went about making contact much better than before. The girl would look at the woman's sincere smile and be embarrassed. That being said, his interlocutor kept saying that people change. That's why the girl should always remember that. The protagonist, in turn, immediately thought that she really has such a warm smile, and she looks at her as her own daughter. So it comes out that most of this woman's face is hidden behind a mask, but she still feels her care. The girl smiled at the woman, but still realized that this world is just a game. And it turns out that if all this is really true, then Haikon's fate has long since been predetermined. At the very moments when the girl thought about it, she began to wonder. It was unclear to her why the Duchess of Blueport had disappeared 4 years ago. It still comes out that at the very beginning of the game, the main person in the Blueport family was definitely not the Duchess. And the very person who headed the family back then was the main male interest, whose name was Levin Blueport. The protagonist did not understand what would happen to Duchess Blueport by the time the game's storyline began. It was completely unclear to her why she changed her mind 4 years later and passed the title to her son. Could it mean that by that time, the Duchess of Blueport simply did not exist? Exactly because of that, though it really rounded my head and I thought it was just some kind of nonsense. The woman that sat next to her certainly noticed this one, but didn't make a big deal out of the whole thing. That said, she said that since her brother had been given the title, there would be a ball in honor of the new Duke of Pesteros. And it turns out that the Duchess would be attending there as well. The girl smiled sweetly and wondered if it was really true. At the same time, the girl thought, does not her interlocutor attend such events only once a year? The woman at this time asked if she was right in thinking that the girl would be very bored without her. The heroine remarked that she would definitely send her an invitation because of that. At the same time, thought that she might be wrong after all. After all, ahead of the additions to the game, the happy life of the Duchy of Blueport was probably mentioned. It's coming out that this is the way it's supposed to be for everything after all. As expected, Hickman still didn't visit his little sister upon her awakening. But still, in spite of this, they met together the next day at breakfast. With each other, as always, they talked and sat literally at different ends of the huge table. The girl, in turn, remembered the words of the Duchess, who said that people change and a girl should remember that. She looked at her brother afterward and thought that it was only a little while before she decided to open her heart to Hikon. It turns out that he had saved her after all, and she was very grateful to him for that. Still, the girl thought that perhaps she might regret her words, but Hikon was not what he might seem at first glance. The guy was quietly sitting and eating, but suddenly he felt his own sister's gaze on him, so he immediately looked up. It was because of this that the gazes converged, and the girl who noticed it. That's why she immediately smiled widely at her brother, showing how happy she was to see him. He, in turn, just looked at her, and as usual said nothing. The girl, in turn, thought that he got a twitch every time she smiled at him. After some time, the girl thought that this was all great and sounded like a challenge. It turns out that now his all doubts will fly away, because we have a very good step towards him. She's going to behave very nicely, and he won't resist because of that. And so the girl comes up to her brother with the food and remarks to him that it is so delicious, so he should try all of it too. That was the moment. The girl immediately flipped the meat from her plate to her older brother's plate. He looked at all this with amazement, while the girl continued to smile. At the same time, the heroine couldn't stand the lamb that was on her plate. When she was done with all this flipping around with her food, the guy picked up his fork and started eating. But in doing so, he was eating his food in his own plate, not the portion that was lying next to it from Dahlia. The heroine was a little angry, and she wondered if the guy from All That She Gives turns his nose up. Then she tried to keep herself in control and told herself to keep well, because she will be able to do everything. Literally, at this very moment, the girl stood there strangely and looked like she was going to hit her brother. He immediately looked at his own sister's strange behavior with a slanted glance. The girl realized that she had done something wrong and thought that she had pressed on. After that, she decided that she should fix this whole situation and didn't know what there was to do. But just a moment later, she put her fingers together to make a heart and showed it to the guy. He, in turn, as always, looked at it very strangely, not understanding what the girl was doing. Then the sad one exhaled loudly and then began to eat his food. At the same time, he already had only pieces from Dahlia's plate left in his plate, which the girl had put in his plate shortly before. She, heroine, thought that someone should let her fall through the ground at all, so much she was ashamed at that moment. Sometime after that, the protagonist was in her room. At the same time, she looked at herself in the mirror and thought about why she deserved such a slanted view of herself. That's why she decided that she should try and practice again. After that, when she stood in front of the mirror, it was to try to portray a pose in which she looked more cute. After a few tries, she realized she was failing. But after a few dozen tries, she did succeed, and she thought, isn't she cute now? Then she thought, she's still beautiful no matter what she does. That's why it's possible that she's literally obsessing over some trivia that she doesn't even need. After a while, the girl left her room, and there she found Sebastian and turned to him. He, in turn, turned around and noticed that it was Mrs. Dahlia. That is why he asked what he could be of use to her. The heroine, in turn, on him, decided to try her cute pose. Further, she did so, and declared to Sebastian that she liked him so much. When the man saw this one, he was very shocked at such a thing. He then immediately shouted to the lady that she should not say such things to other people. The girl wondered to him with astonishment as to why this was so. At that, she thought whether he didn't appreciate what she did now. The man, in turn, after such a thing, even cried and remarked that it was too much, so she could be kidnapped. The girl looked at his reaction with surprise and thought that the status of the butler plan allows him to say something like cute or adorable. But still, for the protagonist, it was not the main thing, because she still the main realized that she is cute, and this is a fact. After that, she went further around the estate and met Darlin there. She had plans to show all this cute emotion to the rest of the people, and in doing so, she practiced. That's why she did that, and everyone looked at her very sweetly. This emotion, she was showing literally everyone from her own nanny to the gardener, as well as all the other maids in this manner. All the people were very mortified at the sight of her and said what an all-around lovely lady they had. The heroine was so very happy and laughed, thinking that no one can resist this face. It turns out that the whole mansion is literally at her feet. The nanny immediately asked the girl to once again make the same emotion that she did before. But the heroine responded by saying that she did not want to do it. At this time, the girl's older brother came out to them and watched the whole thing. The heroine and the maid felt a cold stare and immediately turned towards the young gentleman. In doing so, they were shocked to see him here. As a consequence of all this gaze, the girl and the older brother could be heard with each other. Hikon stated that he still didn't know that this was going into his sister's circle of interest. The girl, in turn, from his words, was very much embarrassed and thought she wanted to fall through the ground. The maid, in turn, apologized and bowed out of there. The older brother wondered if the girl had decided to show this gesture to every person she met. The girl, for her part, stood embarrassed and wondered if she should stop being cute if it didn't suit her. The girl thought that while she was doing something she didn't understand, Hickman was handling the family's affairs all the while. That's why the moment he addressed her, she was very embarrassed and wanted to fall through the ground. Well, literally in the near future, there is an event looming that absolutely cannot be missed. The very event the girl was thinking about was the ball in honor of the new duke. That's why the servants are now a lot of trouble, because the ball will be held next month. The girl also realized that she had to help with all this somehow. That's why Dahlia had been practicing her own dance all this time. Now she was sitting on a chair and drinking tea. Next to the heroine sat her maid, and the mistress noticed that if she did go to the ball, she would need a maid. The girl immediately hugged the woman and remarked that she liked her a lot, that's why she would go with her. The fourth generation of the Duke family has a child with powerful strength, and that's why she is treated like royalty. It is because of this that she has to take a maid as her own escort. The girl thought she didn't even have any friends who would comfort her when sadness crept into her soul. And the woman touched the girl's head and addressed her little mistress. As she did so, she smiled and remarked that she still wanted her to go with her friend. The girl was a little embarrassed and remarked that she understood and would ask her brother then. The interlocutor immediately agreed with mistress's words. After a while, the girl got up and realized that the break was coming to an end. That's why she immediately rushed to the exit and noticed that she would see Darylyn later. The heroine was practicing her dance and thought that the first dance would be with her brother, so it would be awkward if she gave him a leg up. It turns out that to prevent this from happening, the girl does everything and she has to try harder. The teacher that the girl has been practicing all this time said it was a great job. She further razzed her to do the finishing stance on the count of 3. And so the heroine unmistakably did it all, and the dance was quite beautiful. Because of this, the girl was very excited and thought that for the first time she had finished it all without mistakes. The teacher at this time clapped her hands and said that she is just a smart girl since she does such a thing. The heroine smiled sweetly because of this and was a little embarrassed by the praise. The interlocutor in turn went on to say that the Duke had just arrived and he had seen her dancing beautifully the whole time. At this, the joyful face of the girl changed to a very surprised one. Then she turned her head toward the exit of this room to look at him and saw that her brother was indeed standing there. This made her very confused, and she wondered why he was here. The heroine looked at him, and he looked back at her without saying a word. This made the girl as confused as ever and wondered why he was staring at her all this time. At the same time, the dance teacher turned to them and noticed that the Duke had arrived on time. With a smile on her face, she asked if he would like to dance with the lady. Such a heroine certainly did not expect it and was very much worried not to do it because it had just started to dance. Still, it hoped that the older brother did not want to dance with her. That's why she looked at her brother carefully and thought to herself to forget all about it and not want to dance with her. The guy looked at her bright eyes carefully and remained silent. But just a few moments later, he said that he agreed to dance with his little sister. And so soon they were already standing and twirling the two of them in a dance. The girl was very much worried and frightened. However, the dance went out. They had quite well, and no one stepped on each other's feet. During the dance, the girl thought that Haikon is much taller and his peers, and in addition, he is more conscious. It still comes out that he is definitely the Duke and head of the family. It turns out that in her previous life, when she was only 16 years old, she was concerned about ramen and how not to chew her nails off. Now she wondered with embarrassment if her brother was a better dancer than she had previously thought. And it turns out that it must be easier to find things about him that he can't do. She had thoughts in her head that, come to think of it, when the protagonist of this story would show up at all. Perhaps she would meet him in 3 years, and that's when their story would begin. That's when a lot of things will fall on her shoulders. But one way or another, the protagonist and heroine will be bound by the bonds of marriage. While the heroine was thinking about all this, she felt that she made a wrong move. It was because of such an incident, and their feet entwined with each other, and the girl stepped on her brother's foot. She realized that at this time she had made a fatal mistake and began to feel very badly. At this, she immediately removed her foot and apologized to her brother for this grave mistake. She was very ashamed of the whole situation that had happened and thought it was a great honor to inform everyone that this was the end of the life of the 13-year-old girl, Dahlia Pasteros. In a trembling voice, the girl asked her brother if he was in pain. The boy, in turn, looked at her and remarked that there was nothing wrong with it. Further, he did not say anything, and they just continued dancing as if nothing had happened. Further, there were no excesses and they danced well. But the girl was surprised and thought, did he really just keep dancing? All this subsequent time, they continued to twirl in the dance, looking at each other in the eyes. The dance came quite easily to them, and they were doing all the moves correctly and without error. And so, after a while, their dance finally came to an end. The heroine stood aside and was happy that she was lucky, because now she had not tripped once. The dance teacher, in turn, was also very happy and clapping her hands, told the guys that the dance was very good. At the same time, she looked at the Duke and said that he was not so talented, that's why he could literally do anything. At the same time, she turned to the girl and noticed that the lady could do it all, because she did not spare any effort at all. She should practice a little, and she would soon bring everything to perfection. The girl was embarrassed and thanked Mistress Matthew for that. The teacher remarked that that was enough for today and said goodbye until tomorrow. After that, the woman left the room, leaving the heroine alone with her brother. The girl thought, here they are finally tired of the two of them. It turns out that she is very much still worried about his leg. She walked right behind Hikan and wondered what she should say. As she did so, she saw her brother's hand and immediately wanted to touch it. But she suddenly stopped. In turn, the guy felt that the girl wanted to touch him and immediately turned around in her direction. At the same time, he stated that if the girl was going to apologize to him, it should not be done. The girl was embarrassed and remarked with a smile on her face that she knew it after all. At the same time, she pretended that she did not mean to do any such thing. Next, she inquired of her brother, but what was he really doing here? She seriously wondered if he was here to watch her dance. Her brother looked at her and said that he had come here to settle the matter with the maid. The girl remarked that she remembered that exactly, but Darylin agreed. In turn, the boy stated that she had already been assigned a maid by the Emperor. The heroine took this information with surprise. At the same time, she asked if it was really so. Although he was also looking for a maid for her, but it is better to trust His Majesty's choice. To the girl, the fact that he was looking for that for her surprised her very much, and she inquired what he had just told her. Hikan, her such a violent reaction also surprised her a bit. That's why he inquired as to what had surprised her so much. The girl remarked in a slightly embarrassed and shaky voice that it was nothing. The older brother, in turn, wondered if the girl thought he would allow a member of the Pesteros family to attend the ball without a maid at all. The girl thought that just now he had really recognized her as part of the family. It turns out that she didn't expect Hikan to say that to her at all. Her brother went on to say that this person was very close to His Highness anyway. It was because of that that the girl should behave rather politely. The heroine was embarrassed, but she also agreed to all of this. She also realized that step by step, she could feel how he was slowly beginning to open his heart to her. It turns out that just like Duchess Blueport said, maybe Hikan could change too. Hikan notices that the girls will meet her at the party. All this is because this girl is very busy right now and can't see her, but asked her to convey her apologies. The girl understood that in that case to the ball, she would go together with Mrs. Matthew. The interlocutor noticed that her maid's name was Adelicia Benitez. The House of Benitez is not so powerful, for it is a family of viscounts. But there must be a reason why she has become so close to His Majesty. It turns out that Viscount is a title of nobility between Baron and Count. The heroine immediately thought, is it really about Adelicia now? It turns out that heard the name. The main heroine just came in a daze and was very shocked by such a thing. And in a daze, she came only because of the fact that Adelicia Benitez is the heroine of the Labyrinth of Ouroboros story in which the girl fell into. And it turns out that this shit who is now going to be her maid of honor. The girl couldn't believe it and wondered if it was really true. In the end, it turns out that the heroine of the story is her maid of honor. But there was no way that was going to happen. Now she thought she should hang on and remembered the plot she knew well. Remembering the story, the girl knew that Adelicia lived in the lands of Canaan. Canal, it was known as a coastal vacation area, but nearby was a city teeming with criminals. Adelicia herself was raised by a murderer and most cruel ruler named Barracks. It turns out that after some time, she was rescued by an Imperial troop. Since then, Adelicia began to serve the Emperor as her own father. Because of all this, the girl was like his shadow. As the noblest lady, Adelicia Benitez entered the high society, because of which she was assigned various duties. Coming out just like that, she met many significant men, and all of them were terribly afraid of her. That was the whole story that the heroine remembered. However, the fact that she was part of high society was only to be confirmed 3 years later. That was why the heroine didn't understand why it had taken 3 whole years. as expected, she wondered if it was all because of her. It turns out that Hikon had become a new heart, and thus the emperor must have wanted to send guards to the Pesteros house for surveillance. It was about time she needed a maid of honor after all. After all, Dahlia was out of the question in the original, so there was literally no reason to send Adelicia to the Pesteros house. Becoming the maid of honor of the protagonist, the girl will eventually meet Hikon though. If they recognize each other 3 years earlier than in canon, then how further events will unfold was very interesting, the girl. If one does look back at the storyline, Hikon's power will dawn in 2 years at the time he turns 18. For the next year, he fixated on his role as the head of the clan and spent too much power. Looking back on his entire previous life, he wanted to prove his worth to the family that had betrayed him. And it was at that moment, when he drove his soul, that peak. That's when he met Adelicia. The guy had tender feelings for her and at the same time hated the girl who sympathized with him. However, now is the time when Hikon must change. The heroine does not even imagine the courage to happen after their acquaintance, but she is already worried very much. And also all too strongly anticipates it, even though it can't be avoided. But it's such a wonderful opportunity to see the main character of the story in person. She wondered what the sin of it all was, after all. Her favorite character from the story of the Labyrinth of Ouroboros was exactly Adelicia. She wondered if she couldn't enjoy the sweet things of her heart and swarm anymore. And yet the future is really so unpredictable. All these days, the protagonist worked hard in improving her dancing and everything else. After all, she realized that literally very soon the very ball will take place. After a while, the tired girl dragged some book to her room. Immediately, she cracked it open and thought that she should find out about the sublime she was obsessed with before meeting the sandal. All this book turned out to be blank, and the girl simply tore out the pages and drew on them with pencils. After a while, she had a drawing ready, and there were 4 participants in their studio. The first of them was Aceras, who was just as crazy as Hikon. He was the only male character who was staying in the capital for the time being. The heroine realized that she could not lose, get closer to this guy. That's why she drew a few stars near him. After all, he seems to be an unremarkable servant of the emperor, but in fact he is a sublime, hiding his identity. After his magical awakening, he gained immense and divine power opposite to that of the sublime. The divine power, Aceras saves those who are on the cusp of death. Guy left the Frederick Empire and became the Pope of the Holy Empire. But in the end, it so happened that he never recovered. In order to become Pope Aceras, using immense divine power, and every time he goes more and more crazy. What can be accurately stated is that as a servant of the emperor, he appears at every imperial ball. The protagonist now thought that he might not meet Adelicia anytime soon, but still she realized that she did not like it at all. It turns out that Aceras has always applied the skin of a villain, and to get Adelicia, he kidnaps her and starts a war. That's why he and Hikon can be considered the instigators of this whole mess. The second person was a guy named Meldon. He's a member of the organization that Distant was a part of, and it was the most difficult branch in the game that the girl was going through. The next person was Levin Blueport, and he was the son of the Duchess of Blueport. It turns out that numbers 2 and 3 are not in the capital right now, so they should just be skipped. In the original, it turns out that every 3 years a new phase begins. But since Adelicia joined the upper class very early, the future is rather vague. Right now, the girl thought she should just let it go. It turns out that her skills at prediction won't even be enough to predict the fate of the most important character in the game, which is Hikon. That being said, the girl wondered what about the other sublime ones. First, she must meet Adelicia at the ball, and then she can already assess the situation better. The heroine, in turn, erased all memories of the original story, and from that moment, her life became a pleasure for her. But she didn't miss the opportunity to earn money for the ball. She ended up spending literally everything Hikon gave her. With all that money, she bought herself some very beautiful gold jewelry. So it turns out that the girl now does not sell things secretly as before, and having collected all the necessary things, she will run away when the time comes. The heroine happily thought that she was now even closer to her escape. But this very time, it was at the table with its older brother. He saw the strange expression on the girl's face and wondered why she was laughing now. The girl came to her senses and realized that she had forgotten all about her dinner. And when Haikon asked the girl why she was laughing, he said with a smile on his face that she was laughing because she couldn't wait to go to the ball, and all this because it is her first ball after all. The interlocutor did not answer anything to this, and as always, they sat on opposite sides of the table far from each other. Because of this guy's reaction, the girl thought that he would have barked at her before, and undoubtedly he had changed. Still, now it seems to her that he has become more favorable to her a little bit. The girl wondered if it wasn't because of her murderously cute actions, though it turns out it's not because of anything else. In the end, it turns out that the guy even found a companion for her and tries not to look at her with a cold stare, as he did earlier. Still, the girl felt that for a moment she even felt affection for him. Now she sat there and realized with embarrassment that she didn't hate him at all. When she thought of Haikon hurting so many in the future, her heart just broke. Even though it's not news to her, and one day she will leave him. In the end, it turns out that when the sublime use magic power, their soul is destroyed. The girl thought that she is wrong in her reasoning because she will have to go to the capital. Still, it turns out that if everything is as in the original story of the plot, then very soon at the ball the sublime will be angry. However, everything is not as simple as it really is. After a while, the girl was approached and informed that her favorite lemon cake was prepared for her. The protagonist happily gobbled it up and was very joyfully pleased. Also, she thought that so many points are held during the year, and who said that all this would happen at this very ball? After some time, the day for which the protagonist waited for a long time finally came. Since the morning, the girl has been sleeping peacefully, as suddenly the maids came to her. They, in turn, immediately jumped up to the cotton girl, dragging the blanket from her, while waking up the sleeping heroine. With her sleepy, uncomprehending mind, the girl looked up and noticed the maids there, standing over her and addressing her mistress. They were asking her to wake up soon, and the girl was rather startled by this. She wondered what it was, because why they were so happy rushed to her is incomprehensible. After the heroine did wake up, he did not go to the bathroom to wash her. They did literally all the procedures, combing the girl as well as applying her different products. After a while, they began to dress the girl. As a consequence, everything was finally ready, and after a while, the girl was standing fully dressed and ready. The maids looked at the girl with joy and said that she was just cute. She had a very cute look, and they said that the girl would be just the cutest. The nanny was next to them and said that of course she would be, and wondered how they even thought. Suddenly, the girl shrieked that he had enough of such flattering words because she was quite embarrassed. The maids immediately declared that they would do so. After making all the preparations, the girl immediately kicked all the maids out of her room, as well as her own nanny. In doing so, she stated that it was not all out. Finally, after all, she was alone and exhaled with calmness. At that, the girl thought that all she had to do was wait for Madame Masha and everything would be fine. After that, she went to the mirror, and his looking at himself thought that indeed she is a charmer. After that, the heroine went and sat down at the table. For a while, she sat there and realized that she was very much bored. Then she got up and realized what she had to do now. And so she went from her hiding place and pulled out her treasure chest. Her journal was in there, as well as a book for sale. There was also a bundle of gold coins that the girl had been collecting all this time. At that, she thought, she had been so diligent in keeping her diary. It turns out that remembered the past, she just did not allow herself to write, afraid that someone could read it. And so she wondered what she had written on the last page. Suddenly, she looked closely at the lines and realized that it wasn't her kidney after all. It said that she would always find salvation wherever she went, and one more person hopes that the power will help her to save many lives. The heroine carefully read all these lines and was shocked at what it said. At the same time, she did not understand how all this happened, and whose hands it might be was not clear. Further, the girl thought that fortunately for her, when she got her memory back, she had not written anything anymore. Still, it wasn't clear to her who could be messing around with her like that. However, when you think about it, it was probably a blessing rather than a curse. It turns out that the books and money remained in place, which means that it was definitely not a thief. The girl realized that it was difficult to protect herself, and whether she could even protect others. Seconds later, the girl heard the door open, and she was shocked by it. At the same time, she tried to hide all her jewelry box and wondered what kind of scoundrel broke into her room without knocking. At that time, with a leisurely step, her elder brother came up to her and inquired what she was doing now. The girl was frightened at that moment and held the book near her. At that, she looked at her brother, and he was very good at that moment. His looks pleased the girl quite a lot, and she thought he was damn handsome. The protagonist is completely incomplete. Not much is going on, because it was a mystery to her. How he can even look at 16 years old so beautiful. The girl Aj turned away from him because his appearance was dazzling to her. His brother always looked at the girl with surprise and thought that she was acting strangely. At the same time, he paid attention to the book that the heroine held in her hands and asked what it was. The girl immediately smiled sweetly and then hid the diary behind her back. The older brother noticed this and wondered if the girl thought he had a case for her diary. The heroine, in turn, quickly ran to the box and hid her diary there. At the same time, she pretends that nothing happened, immediately inquired what it is her brother is talking about. Hikon, in turn, stated that time was running out after all. At that, he held out his hand to his little sister and remarked that they should go to the ball. The girl looked at him in surprise, not noticing that Madame Mashu had not yet arrived. Hearing this, he exhaled sadly and then formally addressed her, calling her Dahlia Pasteros, declared that since he was her partner, he would take her to the ball. The heroine was very confused by this, and she wondered if he had really named that he would be her partner. Because of the situation, she did not realize what she should do now because it was quite embarrassing. But after a moment, she thought that she should not show her displeasure, and in doing so, she should just smile at her older brother. Then the girl still reached out her hand to him and remarked that they should go. On the way, she smiled at him and said that she was so happy because of it. And her brother was aloof as always and told her to keep her distance between them. After a while, they had already arrived at the banquet. The party was already in full swing there, and there was an innumerable number of people who were of blue blood. The new Duke Pasteros appeared with his younger sister holding hands. The girl was worried and looked at the atmosphere in the hall. She was a little embarrassed because it was her first ball, and she was very excited. The girl, together with her brother, continued to walk near the people who were at the banquet. At the same time, looking at everything around, the girl thought that it was insanely beautiful here. All this is because everything looked very expensive, and yet exquisite. Suddenly, some other people approached them on the way and turned to his lordship, thanking him for the invitation. The girl realized that just as she thought, the organizer of the banquet was a given but well-known person. At the same time, she considered the whole area and thought that indeed the protagonist of the story had not yet appeared on the horizon. After a while, he stopped his gaze and paid attention to one of the women. Looking closer, the girl noticed that it was the Duchess of Blueport whom she had invited recently. The woman was talking to other people at the time, but suddenly turned her attention to the side and saw Dahlia standing there. That's why she had smiled and waved her hand. The girl at the same time saw all this, and also in response did the same. After that, the heroine turned around and immediately walked over to the newly minted Duke and his sister. The moment she arrived, she immediately congratulated Hikon on receiving the title. The boy bowed his head before her and thanked her for it. The interlocutress further asked that he should take care of his little sister in the future. The guy looked at her with an incomprehensible look, but then stated that of course he would do so. After that short conversation about the Duchess left them, though. The girl watched in the wake of her leaving and could do nothing. At this time, the elder brother noticed the girl looking at her. That's why he immediately turned to his little sister and asked if the girl wanted to talk to her. The heroine remarked that she did want to. The guy, in response to this, did not say anything to her, looked at her for several seconds without saying a word. The protagonist, not understanding, thought why he is so quiet now. But suddenly the guy said that soon their first dance will begin. Because of his words, the girl immediately thought about what her teacher said before. And before the banquet, the teacher said that this dance, which they would dance with her brother, always usually dances with partners. That was it, and the girl didn't realize that she couldn't leave until she danced with her own partner. The older brother looked at his sister's strange reaction and noticed that she didn't pretend as if she had heard something strange. The heroine thought that he was really a partner after all, but it also seemed that Hikon had let those words pass his ears. The girl thought, but since she is his partner after all, is everything in order now? After a while, his lordship was approached by the butler and apologized. He noticed that the first tune had been delayed for an hour due to a malfunction. The young gentleman at this time remarked that he understood everything. The protagonist was the older brother nearby and heard it all. The guy turned to her and noticed that she was free for the time being. The girl immediately rejoiced because of this, and the interlocutor continued to talk, but she should not leave the hall. All this turns out because of the fact that literally soon he will introduce her to Adelicia Benitez. The girl thought that means it is necessary to still not come. That's why she agreed with the guy and immediately ran away from him. The girl ran up to the Duchess and addressed her ladyship. The woman in turn turned her attention to her interlocutor. The heroine stated that she wanted to thank her for visiting them after all, and she was so happy. The interlocutor remarked that of course she had visited them, for she did not throw words to the wind at all. After that, together, they stepped aside and began their conversation. The woman remarked that she had heard that the girl would have a companion. The girl remarked that this was so, and that maid of honor was Adelicia Benitez. Thereupon she inquired if they knew her. The interlocutor at once requested that she would give her a few minutes to think. And so, after some time of her reflection, the woman remarked that she had never heard that name before. Dahlia remarked that she understood. The Duchess at the same time remarked that it was all because of what she was doing. It had been a long time since she had revolved in high circles. While they were happily discussing all this, there was also a great atmosphere and socializing with the socialites beside them. Suddenly, the woman declared that she definitely remembered something she wanted to say. And to say she wanted to say that it turns out, she heard that the second prince escaped. The protagonist immediately remembered that the second prince is one of the emperor's sons, whose name is Cedric. Despite the fact that he is not the main character in this game, then he is still sublime. It turns out that he is a man who is good-looking and was able to distinguish himself without magical awakening. He has a lot of female fans even in the palace, and they created a real stir because of this. The girl thought that he was literally a walking problem. The interlocutor at this time said she wondered if they would soon find him at all. The heroine thought that if you put it normally, Cedric is a real tramp. And also, strangely enough, is a lover of other people's suffering. The girl smiled at the Duchess and noticed that once again His Majesty was in trouble. The woman remarked that they should place bets on how long it would take to find him. The heroine smiled because of this and said that it was literally a great idea. The banquet continued, and the noise of the hall did not stop for a moment from the conversations of people. Suddenly, the Duchess turned to the girl and asked if she was bored with her company. The girl took this question with surprise, and then with a smile on her face remarked that of course not. After all, she was comfortable with her. At the same time, thought that she would very much hate to run into someone like Hikon, after all trouble and absolutely no need for it.
After a while, the crowd of people became very noisy, and everyone looked to one side. The heroine looked over there in surprise, not realizing what was going on there. At this time, and the Duchess inquired as to what was going on there.
The girl tried to see what was going on there and thought, is Adelicia really here already? After all, it turns out that there is such a big crowd that the girl simply does not see anything. The Duchess stood astonished, and then noticed that indeed it is all very strange. The heroine did not see that person and asked what she meant. And her interlocutor asked her why His Majesty had also come here. And so the heroine looked forward and still saw the emperor himself there, who greeted everyone and shone with joy. Because of this, she was very shocked and wondered why it was so sudden. After a while, the girl still pushed herself between the crowd of people and thought that the emperor hadn't even uttered a word about whether or not he was coming. Next, she looked carefully at him and the one who had arrived next to her. There, the heroine noticed the very person she didn't want to see here. It was Aceres whom the girl had singled out and thought he was a threat to her. The heroine realized that this was one of the man's main interests, besides minting, of course. Even though this man seems rather humble at the moment, but the girl knew that his soul was on the verge of a breakdown. All this because he had experienced a magical awakening and became exalted with divine power. However, it turns out, he was still a servant of the emperor at that, and it was still quite strange. The girl stopped for a while and began to ponder what his motive was because of this, after all. But suddenly, she saw a girl with dark hair walk by her literally not far away. After a moment, she realized that this girl is just the same and is the main character of this game, Adelicia Benitez. For what you saw, the girl was just in shock now. To see all these main characters live for her was very unusual, and she was very much embarrassed by it. It turns out that this moment she literally had goosebumps running all over her body. And then suddenly the girl heard her older brother addressing her, calling her Dalia Pasteros. The girl noticed him and immediately ran up to him, apologizing at the same time. The two of them then walked together towards the emperor to welcome the dear guest to their banquet. Holding hands, they eluded His Majesty and remarked that they were glad to welcome him. The emperor, in turn, smiled sweetly as always and waved back at them. The newly minted duke asked the man what had brought him to them. The man, in turn, smiled and remarked that he really wanted to arrive a little early and congratulate him on receiving the title of duke. But as it happens, his unintelligent son Cedric had spoiled it all. Then, the emperor held out his hand to his subordinate, and the latter took out some roll from his clothes. And further, his lordship made it, and remarked to the duke first to take in this. The girl looked intently at all that was going on, and thought it looked like a letter of congratulation. The pirates went on to say that now they could do whatever they wished, but a little later, Adelicia would join them. At this very time, a girl approached them, and together with the heroine, they locked gazes. She then bowed to the girl and greeted her, noting that her name was Adelicia Benitez. She also smiled very sweetly and remarked that it was a pleasure to meet her. The girl, looking at her beautiful smile, was a little embarrassed and then greeted her back. At the same time, in the back of her mind, the protagonist's heart was breaking because Adelicia was such a beauty in her opinion. However, for some reason, it seemed to her that there was some shadow lurking in the depths of her eyes. Remembering the plot of the game, the girl realized that the bandits who raised Adelicia had taught her to kill and spy at the same time. Even if the Sublime himself pursued her, there was no way she would refuse his help. The heroine remembered how the girl had met Hikon, and then wondered if they could be friends. That was why she thought that the girl was definitely a really good person. But despite all this, it has a rather sad ending. The girl thought that she would like to do something about the dire circumstances that would be in the future. That is why she is now hoping that she can help her in some way. While the heroine was thinking about all of this, she saw Akers. She noticed that he was alone and doing something strange. He stood looking at a glass with some drink, and the girl wondered what he was doing now. The man swirled the drink in the glass for a while and then placed it on the tray. After a while, he did the same action with the rest of the glasses, going through them one by one. The girl realized that this looked very much strange, and wondered if he was really considered dangerous. Still, it was unclear to her whether he would become as human as Hikon. The emperor looked at the heroine at the same time and asked if she was all right. At that, he stated that he was rather embarrassed to say anything at that moment. It was all because the girl needed to hear that his son Cedric was here somewhere. With Lady Dahlia's permission, he would like to take Hikon with him for a while. And when the newly minted duke heard this, he had no words for it. He further realized that he would have no choice, there sadly exhaled. The girl remarked that of course she was letting him go, let him as he wished. The emperor thanked her for that. Immediately afterward, the man closed his eyes and began to use his immense power. The girl looked at him in surprise and felt some kind of power. At the same time, she did not understand why the atmosphere suddenly became so heavy around her. Alexander noticed that Dahlia was behaving strangely, and at the same time she looked confused. That's where he turned to her and remarked that he wouldn't do her any harm, so she shouldn't worry. Still, it turns out that his son may have used magic to hide himself and his powers, and by the trail of magic itself, he would be able to know his location. The girl stated that she understood everything. At the same time, she thought that to put it briefly, it was too hard to follow the flow of magic in such a large room. The man looked at the whole room for a while, and then went straight in the other direction. His step was very uncertain at that moment, as if he knew which way the boy was. And now he had already reached some unknown person who was standing right at the side of the room. The emperor looked at him, noticing that he was exactly here. That same stranger immediately smiled and then began to use his magic. While doing so, he stated to his father that he had been many times faster in previous times. That person just so happened to indeed be the second prince of the Frederick Empire, whose name was Cedric. The emperor, pointing his fingers at his own son, shouted, "Cedric is a disgrace to the Imperial family." The boy, in turn, just smiled at him, and the man had nothing left to do but to declare that he should quickly follow him. Cedric didn't answer him anything but started to follow him. The emperor approached the duke and remarked that it was time for him to go. As he did so, he apologized for the inconvenience to him. The prince, upon seeing Hikon, immediately greeted him by waving his hand. As he did so, he remarked that it would have been a lot easier if the idiot Aceres had been more attentive. Before he could finish saying that, he was again addressed by the emperor, who was shouting at the same time. The protagonist was carefully looking at this whole situation that was happening from the outside. At the same time, she realized that all of this was literally happening as it was in the original story. So it turns out that from the outside, the lake will be able to seem literally angelic. But it still comes out that his relationship with Cedric leaves much to be desired. This whole situation, and what the prince said, just confirms it all. The heroine now looked at us and at the emperor, and thought that Cedric was incredibly handsome. Still, it comes out that he is the eminence of the Imperial family, not unlike Hikon and the other main characters in the story. However, he was definitely not obsessed with the main character of this story, Adelicia. That was because he was not the main male interest. Right now, the guy turned his attention to the girl, and their gazes immediately converged. The heroine at this point became very tense and very embarrassed. That's why she also covered her eyes with her hands, and the guy looked at her with surprise. The girl thought that she was literally an idiot, because why the eyes to close then was not clear. After a few seconds, she came to her senses and immediately opened her eyes with embarrassment. In front of her, she saw the prince, who smiled sweetly at her because of it. The kid asked her, "She is Hikon's younger sister after all, if he understood correctly." The girl, in a trembling voice and very worried, remarked that she was. Suddenly, the emperor turned to him and shouted if he was even following him. The lad immediately ran to him and remarked to his majesty that he was near him. He next bade Hikon farewell, and the duke remarked that he wished them a good journey. The girl, for her part, thought he had gone after all. And when the Imperial family did leave the banquet, the two of them stood alone, exhausted by the presence of the Imperial family. The older brother remarked to the girl that they should postpone the dance until better times. The heroine smiled in response to this one and remarked that indeed they should. Suddenly, Miss Dahlia and his lordship the Duke were approached by Adelicia Benitez. Turning her attention to her, the heroine thought that, come to think of it, she was saying that she would be back soon. The girl went on to say that in the near future she would become their maid of honor. That's why it was very nice to meet her. It immediately became clear to the girl that if she thought accurately, she could now see the first reaction chasingly to the main character. Immediately, she shifted her gaze to her older brother, carefully waiting for the whole thing. But when she looked at the guy, she was shocked, for he turns out to be looking at her. She wondered why he was looking at her and not Adelicia. Her older brother wondered if she didn't like this girl. Dahlia hadn't expected such a question and was confused at the moment, not understanding why he was asking it. After a moment of confusion, she said that of course she did like her. The interlocutor remarked that that was fine then, and that was where he and now would end. After that, he immediately turned around and went in the other direction. From such a girl was shocked and thought that it was all bad. Still, it turns out that she definitely understands that the story and changed, but is it really so uninterested in Adelicia? However, if Hickman is not obsessed with Adelicia, then the story will really change, and then Hickman's escape may not happen. The girl thought that if all this really happens, then maybe she won't die. The girl was behaving strangely, and her interlocutor, who was standing next to her, did not understand why this was happening. Next, the heroine noticed that she apologized to Lady Adelicia because she briefly thought about it. The girl in turn noticed that there was nothing wrong with it. And yet, it turns out, if she really does not like her, she promises that she will do everything that will be in her power only. That said, she gave her a genuine smile at that moment. Dahlia looked at her with delight and thought that she really is such a cutie. it turns out that she really is her main character from the game after all. Suddenly, she realized that now was not the time to think about all of this, because she needed to fix the situation. At the same time, she noticed that Adelicia misunderstood, because she is really happy with her. After all, she was very, very pleased with her arrival. Then she asked that henceforth she should not be called Lady Dahlia, but simply Dahlia. The interlocutor looked with amazement at the girl's pretty face and remarked that of course she would do so. After a while, the heroine thought that all these people are the ones when she loves, and that's why she wants to be friends with them all. Also, after all, she thinks that Adelicia will not mind all this. Now the girl was looking around the hall looking for one person, and after a while she did look to the side and saw the woman who was looking there. After that, she turned to the Duchess of Blueport with a smile on her face. But at this time, the woman was acting strangely and had a very bad headache. The girl noticed all this, and noticed the glass falling out of the woman's hands. Worried about the Duchess, the girl immediately ran up to her. At the same time, she inquired about her ladyship and whether she was all right. She also asked where she was hurting and tried to touch her. At this time, the woman realized that strange things were happening to her and immediately threw the girl's hand away. The heroine was surprised at everything that had just happened now. The Duchess, in turn, continued to behave strangely while holding her head, but further turned to the girl and noticed her to immediately move away from her. The heroine wanted to notice something at this point, but suddenly she was stopped by Adelicia. The girl remarked to her that she should not do that. After all, it turns out that it is really dangerous at this time. All the people that were around immediately turned their attention to the Duchess. They all lined up next to each other, looking at her, and at this time the atmosphere began to heat up very much around. The main thing, despite everything that was happening now, thought, is it really a magical awakening? But it was not at all incomprehensible to her why this was happening all to the Duchess of Blueport. The crowd of people that were around fearfully watched everything that was happening. The heroine kept wondering why this was all happening right now, because there were literally no telltale signs. After a while, she did realize that everything was for a reason. She would be horrified and remembered that she had actually forgotten something. And it turns out that she had forgotten on the fact that the Sublime would soon lose control of themselves. All this just as it should happen exactly at the ball. Now the girl thought most likely that's why 4 years later, the main role will be at Levin Blueport, who just and soon will become a duke. There were enough hints for a magical awakening to erupt at the banquet that would drive the Sublime mad. And it comes out that it would all happen because of that incident with the Duchess of Blueport. Immediately, Haikon rushed to the scene. The guy saw the Duchess sitting on the ground with some strange energy emanating from her. At the same time, as soon as he saw it, he realized what was happening and was very frightened. Therefore, he immediately turned around and turned to his subordinates, telling them not to call His Majesty here right away. The subordinates immediately obeyed the Lord, and a commotion began. The protagonist stood in this commotion and pondered over everything that was going on. Still, she realized that there was only one way to stop the awakening, and that was to kill the Sublime. And she remembered the woman's smiling face and all those moments with her. The Duchess, for her part, could no longer control her power, and touching some things would immediately destroy them. Her magical energy continued to burst out of her body, and there was no way to stop it. The people that were around her in the room started to panic a lot when they saw what was happening. One of the men, frightened at once, tried to run away from the place. But the moment he ran a few meters away from the Duchess, he hit some obstacle. At the same time stopped, he touched that very spot and saw with difficulty is some invisible wall. People continued to panic and wondered what it was and where the wall appeared from. It turns out that they are trapped in this room after all. The Dean, hearing this, thought that point-blank possession could indeed create high walls with its power when the awakening reaches its climax. Adelicia turned to the Duke and inquired when His Majesty would return here. The man remarked that he would only appear in a moment. The girl realized that it was necessary to act right now and looked carefully at the girl. In doing so, she clearly noticed that Dahlia most likely must be very surprised. That's why she wondered if she was all right. After all, she had to follow the Duchess of Blueport, and the girl had to hurry up and get out of here. The heroine was Darina such her words and wondered, well, how she would get out. After all, the girl now realized that the situation is very much risky and dangerous. The interlocutor, in response to her question, smiled sweetly and noted that she had already made a decision. The Duke, in turn, also turned further and remarked that she should go to him because it was very dangerous to be there. The girl turned her head and looked at him carefully. At the same time, she was very much worried about the whole situation that had developed and thought about what she should do. Immediately in her head began to spin thoughts about the notes that she found in her diary. It said that she would always find salvation wherever she was, and strength would help her save many lives. But now the girl wondered what she should do, for before the terrible thing happened, she had to do something. While she was thinking about all this, she was approached by the Duchess, who was sitting behind her. The girl heard what the woman was saying and immediately turned around to speak to her. The woman asked if she could wait a bit and wondered if he could ask her something. The girl turned around and decided to get closer to her, reminiscing about all those moments spent with this woman. At the same time, the protagonist carefully watched what was going on and did not understand why the Duchess was addressing her. Suddenly, the Emperor, who was addressing Haikon, burst into the room. He rushed in very quickly, for the situation was unfolding very rapidly. The Duke noticed that at last His Majesty had arrived at their place. Alexander wondered what had happened to the Duchess of Blueport. After all, he had been here just recently, and she was fine, but why she had suddenly become so incomprehensible. And while they were talking about all of this, a bright flash of light began to cover everything around them, and it was coming from the Duchess. At the epicenter of this event was Adelicia, along with the main character. Adelicia stood closer to the Duchess, and because of this flash of light began to cover her faster. The heroine, on the other hand, was a little farther away and could still get away in time. Haikon noticed that his younger sister was in danger and immediately rushed to her aid. The Emperor noticed this and tried to stop Haikon, but he didn't listen to him and was already near the girl. The heroine noticed her older brother and was happy that he tried to help her. But just the next moment he pushed the guy away, used his hands to prevent him from being hit by this energy. The older brother was shocked at what his sister was doing and looked at her carefully. The girl at this time only continued to smile sweetly at him until she was struck by a bright flash of light. Immediately, the Emperor ran up to him and tried to protect him with his magic power. In doing so, he held his hand in an attempt to hide him from that bright light. Next, Alexander shouted to the Duke, had he lost his mind? Still, before this magic flares up, he must be as far away from this epicenter as possible, or he would be irradiated. But the Duke was unstoppable, and he was trying to get close to this epicenter to save Dahlia. He realized that there was nothing he could do, and the Emperor was holding him back at that moment. The older brother at that very moment wondered exactly why the girl had said everything the way she did. When she pushed him away, the boy wondered why on earth she had done that. The girl smiled sweetly at him and then stated that it was because she was going to be okay. It was because of this that the guy was tormented, wondering why she did and said this after all. Suddenly, His Majesty the Emperor was addressed and noticed that the walls on all sides had disappeared. In response to this, Alexander said that he was glad to hear that, and then added that he needed to secure everything here now. That was why he drew his sword in order to do so by using his power. Immediately after that, he swung his ball towards all this magic. Next, he realized that there wasn't even a scratch left on it from that strike of his. The Emperor then stated that it would be quite difficult to remove the shield for the sake of saving two people. Literally at the same time, the protagonist was in the center of this place. While doing so, she thought that this must be a really important event happening right now. Looking at this entire area, the girl wondered if indeed the Duchess had created a shield while inside. She realized that she was worried about what had happened to her, but it was good that it was all over. And all this because she was very happy because of the fact that her arms and legs were still in place. After a while, the girl realized that Adelicia should be this here too. That's why, looking all around, she thought that she would find her soon. While the girl was looking, Yes remembered the situation that happened to her older brother, namely, the moment when he came to save her. The girl realized that he didn't even know that she would come to his rescue. She was now wondering quite a bit what he was thinking after all of this had happened. Suddenly, the girl reached one place and noticed that someone was there. Indeed, there was Adelicia. which the girl was looking for all this time. When the heroine approached her, this girl felt that then is behind her and immediately turned there. After she saw further, this immediately ran up to her. At that, she noticed here she was and asked if she was injured. At that moment, she had a sad look and noticed that she should have protected her, but did not do so. That was why she was asking for her forgiveness from her. The protagonist smiled sweetly and remarked that there's no need to apologize because everything is really fine. It turns out that she is also very happy for Adelicia staying fine as well. Also, continuing to consider everything around her, the girl thought that it was not as dangerous here as it seemed and informed her interlocutor about it. But suddenly, the girl noticed that this was not the case at all, for it was not safe here at all. And all this is because the shield, which was around them, simply narrows. The girl asked if it was really so. The girl said that it was, because the wall was getting closer. The heroine at this point was shocked, or wondered if they would really be flattened. She thought that it turns out, indeed, they are in big trouble. Although she thought it was all good, it certainly wasn't. At this point gave themselves away, she noticed that there must be, after all, a way to get out of here. At the same time, they began to think about what can still be done in this situation. After some reflection, the protagonist turned to the interlocutor. With a smile on her face, she said that if there was no other way, what if he did not visit the Duchess of Blueport? The interlocutor was shocked at such a question from her and inquired what she was saying now. The girl remarked to her that if the shield continued to shrink, they would be able to meet her. And as a consequence of all these actions, perhaps they could find a solution to this whole problem. There was nothing left to do but to agree to this proposal. And so, together, they began to look for the Duchess. Adelicia followed the protagonist and at the same time considered her. The girl settled in the midst of thinking about what was happening and wondering how the Duchess of Blueport would look like now. After some time of wandering and in this place, they did reach a woman who stood alone. The Duchess felt someone approaching her and immediately turned around to look at them. Upon turning around, the woman saw that Dahlia was there, as well as Adelicia Benitez. At that, the woman no longer had the very mask on her head that covered her face, hiding her huge burn scar on her face. After the protagonist saw the Duchess, she immediately tried to run up to her. But the girl stopped her too, while asking her to wait a bit, because if she came near her, things would get pretty bad. Suddenly, the Duchess turned to the girl and noticed that it was Adelicia Benitez. She also remarked to you that she was sorry that their first meeting had turned out like this. At this time, the woman had a rather sad look on her face, and she noticed that the space created should hold her back. It also turns out that they simply can't enter and anyone can get out of here, which couldn't be said for her. The girl immediately inquired as to how the Duchess was after all. Hearing such a question, the woman smiled, and then noted that for the soul that began to collapse the way back, there is literally no way back. As a consequence, she will simply wait for her end here. The heroine, hearing these words, was shocked, but realized that there was probably no other choice. The Duchess, in turn, turned to Lady Adelicia and said that before she disappeared, she would like to spend her remaining time with Dahlia. At this, she asked if she would allow them to spend time together. The girl at this point looked at her carefully, contemplating the whole situation. At this time, the heroine grabbed her hand and stated that everything would be really fine. After that, the interlocutor took the hand of the girl as well and remarked that then, well, she would leave first and explain everything to His Majesty at that moment. It turns out that there was nothing left for her to do but to confide in the girl and Lady Duchess. At last, the girl declared that they would see Dahlia later for sure. After these words, she immediately left the whole place. As a consequence, the protagonist remained only alone with the Duchess. The woman turned to her and asked if perhaps they should sit down. After a while, they sat down and began their conversation. The Duchess remarked to the girl that she loved her very much, and so she wanted to apologize for the way things had turned out like this. It was painful for the girl to hear all this, and her tears were already coming.